Okay, so I'm sitting here with Terry Manning, who has had one of the most incredible careers that I've ever heard of in the pro audio industry. I just got to ask, how old were you when you realized that when you walked into a room, history just tended to happen around you?
You know, I never ever thought of it like that. I started in studios when I was 15, 16 years old, which is ridiculous when I think about it. But you're not ever, over the whole number of years, I've never thought, only 3 or 4 times maybe you really think, oh, this is really historical music that's happening, just because it's so great and the people around you are so great. But I never ever thought this is historical, anybody will care in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever. You're there to do your job. You know, you're there to work. It's like going to school. They don't want you on your phone. They don't want you talking in class. They want you studying. It's the same thing to me. I just thought of it as a job that I was there to do, and I was so lucky to get to do it. I didn't want to screw it up.
Absolutely.
It's a tough question to answer, really.
So 15, 16 years old, you find yourself in Memphis, correct?
Correct.
How'd you end up there?
Well, previous to that, I'd been in El Paso, Texas for about 5 or 6 years. And those were, I think back of them as the formative years, very young teenage years, when you're kind of learning your place in the world. You're getting away from your parents a little bit, but not leaving them yet. And you're thinking on your own. You're hearing music you like on the radio. And I had run into the very first live band I ever saw. The first concert was a junior high dance. And I went to the dance, and I couldn't wait because there was going to be a band there. And I had heard that band on the radio. The band was a local guy in El Paso named Bobby Fuller. And he had a band called Bobby Fuller and the Fanatics. Later became the Bobby Fuller Four and had several worldwide hits, especially I Fought the Law, classic all time. But this was before that, when they'd gone to Hollywood and broke. But around El Paso, they were the band. Bobby had his own nightclub called The Rendezvous. He had his own record label. He had his own studio in his house. I was just in awe. This guy has everything. I want those things. I want to do these things. But when he was playing the junior high concert, well, it was not a concert, it was a dance. I had never heard live guitars, live drums, PA system, anything like that. And it stunned me. These guitars were loud, the drums were pounding, people were singing great. It was just like the radio. I was just amazed. So right then I just thought, this is what I've got to do. I love this. So I started bothering. I went up to Bobby at that dance between sets and asked if I could sit in with them, because I had gotten the guitar for Christmas, Montgomery Ward's acoustic guitar. And I thought I knew about 3 chords. I knew D, and I knew G, and I knew E. That's about it, maybe A. But I went up to Bobby and I said, can I sit in with you guys? I have a guitar. I've learned some songs. And instead of saying, kid, leave me alone, it's my break, come on, you're bothering me, he just said, sure, what do you know? Come on. And handed me his Stratocaster, which I had never touched an electric guitar in my life. I was just, oh my God. I'd only seen them hanging on the wall at the music store and just lusting after. In fact, Bobby works at the Melody Shop in El Paso, which is where they sold Fender guitars. And he had pointed out, or one of the people there had pointed at them one day and told me, and look, that's a Stratocaster. Well, I looked at it and I saw the whammy bar on it, the vibrato bar, and I thought they were pointing at that. So for years, I thought that bar was called the Stratocaster. I'm a kid, you know.
No,
I was 14 at the time, 13 or something. So anyway, in junior high, he let me sit in with his band. Not his band, only him. The other guys didn't care at all.
Mm-hmm.
So he got a different guitar, let me play his Stratocaster, and we sang Peggy Sue. He let me sing it to my junior high class. Once you've done that, that's it. You're locked.
Yeah.
What else are you ever going to do? That's what you want to do. You're singing a Buddy Holly song to your classmates. Wow. So I had that background. I would bother Bobby. I would go by his house see his studio, ask him questions. How did you write that song? What are you doing when you produce? Blah, blah, blah. And he would answer. He would give little answers to my naive questions. So I had that background in my head. I would go home and practice. We had a band. We named it the Wild Ones and didn't really play any official gigs. We'd go to a backyard party and bang around and things. And even tried to record an album in the bathroom of the back house of our drummer, with one mic and a Wallensack recorder.
Yeah.
But it later came out on Norton Records many years later. It's very crazy, dumb, naive, but full of energy, just yay, little kids. So when my dad was a minister, and every few years he would move to a new church in a new place to do what he did. He liked to build a new building for churches as he preached to them and sort of build up the congregation. So he said, we're moving on, and I've got 2 places to go. One is maybe Fairhope, Alabama, and the other is Memphis, Tennessee. And as soon as he said Memphis, this light just went off in my head, because I had seen that printed on labels of Stax and Satellite and different records that I'd gone to buy with my allowance. I'd gone to buy my 45 of the week. Some of them said Memphis on them. I said, ooh, there are record companies there. So I just, go to Memphis. And it turned out he did, probably not because of anything I said. But as soon as we got to Memphis, I was damn sure I was getting to Stax. I was going to Stax Records, and that was a real record company, and I was going to work there. So at 15 years old, after school, I'd just gotten a Telecaster. Got my first electric guitar. My dad had helped me buy it. I got a 1952 Telecaster, which I still have.
Oh my God.
At the time, it was nothing special. It was just, there were lots of them around.
Very special now.
But now it's pretty special. But I'd have 2 52 tellies, in fact. But I put it in my locker, locked it up real good, and after school took that guitar, got on the bus, and got as close to Stax as I could on the bus, and then walked the rest of the way up Macklemore, knocked on the door or rang the bell, whatever, and a woman was there named Deanie Parker. It wasn't her job to be receptionist. She did much higher level things, but at that lunch hour she was, or whatever, after school hour, she was on the front desk. She let me in, talked to me a little bit, and was very nicely about to usher me out when a tall guy walked through and looked down, and he saw my guitar case there. Because the case in my telly was the old style, the one that, it's not a straight oblong.
Yep.
It had the curves to it to match the guitar. So he looked down and said, what's in the case there, son? And I said, it's a Telecaster, sir. Would you like to see it? He said, yeah, I play a Telecaster. Let me see it. Well, we sat right there in the lobby at Stax, played a few chords, talked, and he said, it's a nice guitar. I could use this. And he said, why are you here? And I explained I was there to write songs, produce, engineer, sweep the floor, whatever they needed. I was there. And that guy was Steve Cropper, which, you see, that's luck. What kind of luck is that?
Absolutely.
For Steve Blanken Cropper to walk in when I was about to be pushed out the door. And we're still great friends to this day. I love him to death. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he said, can you run a tape recorder? We could use somebody to copy tapes, a few days a week or whatever. So he took me down to the tape copy room, and I said, sure, I can run a tape recorder. But I had played the Wallensack. My dad had a Webcore, whatever the old things were, 3Ms.
With the magic eye.
With the magic eye,
Yeah.
exactly. And my grandfather had one too, which I would sing and play into. So I knew enough to say, yeah, I can push the record button and get levels and copy tapes. So he put me to work after school, a couple of days a week, whenever, to come over and make safety copies or copies for people to take home from sessions. And then I would go every chance I had. I would sneak down the hall and look in the real studios, especially Studio A. They had 2 really nice studios, A and B. And I would look in wherever something was happening and just watch. So people got used to seeing me around the halls. I wasn't an outcast that shouldn't be there or something. So one day, somebody, on a demo session, somebody said, Engineer hadn't arrived. Can you run the board? And I had watched. I knew the buttons people were pushing, but I had not really had any training on the console. So I just went in and said, sure, always answer yes, and then find out if I could do it or not.
Yes.
So I just started pushing some buttons and nothing happened. Another button, finally sound came out and they said, there it is, roll tape. So I turned around and hit the tape recorder, the Ampex, and started rolling and recorded something. So from then on, I was known as an engineer. And Steve started showing me things, Jim Stewart started showing me things. And I'll just go on with the story, I guess.
No, keep going. Yeah, I'm all for it.
Around Memphis, I had gotten in a band. Joe Gaston, who's a great bass player and a great friend of life, was in Central High School, where I was going at the time, and said, our keyboard player's leaving our band, the Bobby and the Originals. Can you play keyboards? Yes, sure. And my mother was a piano teacher, so I knew some. She tried to teach me, and I wouldn't listen. I wanted to do rock and roll, not the little things she wanted to teach. But I had some knowledge of the keyboard, so I said yes, and then went home to my dad. You've got to buy me a keyboard. I can get in a band. This is my chance. Okay. Took me down to a music store. I bought a Wurlitzer electric piano, the old brown-colored one, pasteboard one.
The 206?
I don't know the model numbers, but
Yep.
I guess it's not the black one, the later
Yep.
one, but the earlier one. And I got that and took it to band practice and tried out and just knew the chords well enough and got in the band. And then that band, this is such a long story, but that band got a chance to go on a TV show in Memphis called Talent Party. It had started, it had a different name, I think, Dance Party first, something, and Wink Martindale, who was later a game show host, national NBC network game show host, was the DJ, but it was taken over when he left by George Klein, who was Elvis Presley's best friend. And George Klein had this Talent Party TV show, and he would bring local bands on, and national talent would come through and play the show. So our band, Bobby and the Originals, had a chance to get on Talent Party. So they had gone to Sonic Recorders. That was a little studio in Memphis on Madison Avenue that was run by Roland Janes, who had been Jerry Lee Lewis's guitar player, one of them, his guitar player in his traveling band. And he had a really nice studio. It was a mono Ampex studio with a few mics. But the band had gone in there just prior to my joining the band and recorded some demos. So we listened to those demos, and our band manager said, they don't sound quite good enough. We really want to get on this TV show. So he took it to his friend, John Fry, who had a home studio in his house. He and a guy named Fred Smith had put in Ardent Records and released a couple of local records, and Ardent Studio in John's home. And but much like Bobby Fuller's, it was better than just what you would think of a home studio at the time. They both had Ampex recorders. They both had Neumann or Telefunken mics. They had real stuff, but in a house. So our band went there, and John, really what he did was master this demo. He compressed it, EQ'd it, got it the level up, made it sound more exciting. Today would be called mastering. And we did get on Talent Party. But that exposure to John Fry, at the time I was just hanging around Stax, gave me such an education, because although I would hang maybe for a year or so in John's home studio, pretty soon he said, I want a real studio and we'll rent it. People will come in and pay us money. Okay. So he hired me to be his very first employee, and we scouted buildings, looked at several things all around town, old movie theaters, which was a Memphis thing.
Yes.
But decided not to. We rented a building that was half of a very long building, the other half of which was a Bible bookstore. So it was very appropriate that rock and roll music was going into the Bible bookstore area. And we put in Ardent Studio. Because I was working at Stax and they needed other places to do overdubs and overflow work, they started coming to Ardent. And before you knew it, we were doing work for people from Nashville, from Missouri, from Florida, from Mississippi, Arkansas, all over Tennessee, just bringing it, because what John did was he wanted to be ahead of the state of the art. John was a brilliant, brilliant person, a real genius, IQ of probably 506 or something. So he studied, he knew sound, wasn't a musician, he didn't play instruments or write songs, anything like that, but he was the technical genius. And I learned so much from him as well. So learning from people like Cropper, Stewart, John Fry, Bobby Fuller before that, I just can't imagine. I mean, that was the best school I could ever have gone to. At Ardent, we would do these sessions for jingles, not just rock and roll or R&B or Stax things that were coming over. There was a big company in Memphis that was the biggest jingle company in the world. They were called Pepper at the time. Later, Bill Tanner was a partner. It was Pepper Tanner. After that, it became just Tanner when he bought it out. But at the time, it was Pepper. They had a local record company, Pepper Records, and they made jingles for all radio stations all over the world, BBC, all stations all over the U.S. It's WXRP, da-da, that kind of jingle stuff. But things for stores, too. 30-second, 1-minute jingles with what they'd call a donut, a hole in the middle where the announcer would speak. But it had a big band. Well, they started doing these library sessions, they called it, which would be between 60 and 80 musicians. Full orchestra, but not playing as a classical orchestra. Strings, classical horns, but with bass drums, playing pop music-based jingles. So I got sent in to do these sessions of up to 80 people, no assistant, union sessions, so you had no time. It wasn't practice, let's get it right, can you play that again? It had to be right. So once a week, every week for a year or more, these big sessions would come in, so I had to learn in advance where I would have a list sent to me of what the instrumentation was going to be. I'd have to have the chair set up, the mic set up, section it off for the strings, 4 on a mic or 2 on a mic, whatever. And I'm like 17 years old in there running an 80 person musician session that was union. It had to be right. They'd play the first song, it was a jingle, usually 30 seconds. If you were lucky, it was a minute. They'd play that down once. And that was your sound check.
Yep.
There's no going back. It had to be right. So I had to learn how to pre-guess what the levels were going to be from experience whatever little experience I had and the mentoring I had. It was just massive. Once you've gone through a few of those, you're home free. You can do anything. I'm sorry, that's a real long answer.
No, I love it. So you pretty much, you got thrown into the fire at a very, very young
Absolutely.
age.
It's thrown into the fire. There's no second chances, and you're going to be fired if you don't do it right. So you don't think about it. You just do it. You have to do it.
But the people around you clearly had a lot of trust in your abilities.
They did. I wonder now why, because I still, every session I go into, there's all that little bit of, okay, what am I going to screw up this time? You know, what's going to happen? Of course, you have confidence. You've done it. I've probably done, I hate to say it, but I've probably done more sessions than any other human ever, just because I still do it. I did it way back then. This is, I hate to say it, but early 60s we're talking about. At 16, 15 years old, I'm in running machines and doing sessions. So you get a confidence, but I guess because of, maybe I have an attitude about myself that says I know what I'm doing. I'm faking it, of course, or was certainly then. But I don't know, that I was trusted by people, and I think I was seen as the baby around Stax, for instance, like the Barkays were, if you know them. Mm-hmm. They were the new second band that came in, and they were 16 or 17 years old before the plane crash, when most of them were killed with the Otis Redding plane crash. But they were little kids. They were seen as the little kid musicians. I was probably seen as a little kid engineer around Stax. But if you can do it, you just do it, and people learn to trust you. You know.
Absolutely. So, you're over at Ardent, and some guys from Texas come up to make a record.
3 of them
3 of them.
with hats and boots.
And did they have beards then?
No, Billy didn't. Dusty had. You're talking, of course, of ZZ Top.
Yes.
ZZ Top for you Americans. Yeah, the way that happened was kind of weird. I was driving late one night. What year would this have been? I don't know years. Maybe late 60s-ish? I don't know. But anyway, I'm driving along, headed back to my apartment late one night after a session, and over the radio comes a song I had never heard, a band I had never heard, that knocked my socks off. It's one of those moments that hopefully we've all experienced where you pull off on the side of the road to hear the rest of the song. You just, what is that? That was a song called Sure Got Cold After the Rain Fell by ZZ Top. So I was waiting, who is this? Announce it, please announce it at the end. Long, slow blues song, incredible guitar, gruff voice singing bluesy. Thought, who is this, a black group, a white group, blues group, rock group? What is this? And they announced it was ZZ Top from Texas. And I thought, whoa, Texas, they must be good, because I'm from Texas. So we're all, you have to be from here to know what I mean. But so I immediately started trying to find out more about them, went and bought that album. It was their first album, and was listening, or maybe it was the second. Anyway, one of the first 2 albums, and decided I wanted to work with this band. So I started trying to send messages to Billy Gibbons. I found out he was the leader of the band. Just at that time, it must have been early 70s, because I had just done the Led Zeppelin 3 album, all the mixing, the final overdubs, and the mastering for Led Zeppelin 3, which is another long, crazy story. But Billy had heard that on the radio and loved it. He said, why can't my band have the sound, technical sound quality of that record? Which I think they sounded great anyway, but he was wondering that, so he was trying to find me. At that time, I was trying to find him. They came to play in Memphis. I sent a note backstage, and crazy enough, he had sent a note, heard I was in the building, and sent a note up to me. So we got together, and I said, come on, yeah, Ardent, Memphis will record you. So they just started coming, and I guess 17 or 18 years I worked with them on all the big records.
Yes, yes.
I don't know how many of them, but a lot of records.
I will say, your old posts had me out there buying. I have bought a Legend guitar amp because of your posts.
What did you think of it?
I couldn't make it sound like Eliminator. I can
know,
tell you
it's
that.
weird because I think it may take Billy.
Yeah, I mean, the
Something
tones in the hands.
But no, that was Eliminator, the biggest of all their albums, of course. And on that album, all the guitar, I think we did one overdub, or maybe 2 little overdubs on something else at the end, which we had torn down. But 99.9% of all the guitar on that album was done with that Legend 50-watt amp, which is a hybrid, part tube, part transistor amp, with one AKG 414 mic in one place. And it didn't matter if we were doing leads, just rhythms, tracking. We never moved the mic, never moved anything. Just it stayed in one place. I can just see it right there. There's the amp, and the mic's off at a little bit of an angle, angling toward the cone, but not right on the cone, just to where it sounded good. I like one mic on guitars. I mean, all this 2 mic thing. If it works for you, great. But
Keep the phase solid.
Yeah, I like one solid phase, proper mic that has the sound you want.
Do you tend to record with a condenser microphone on guitars, or? It
depends. I have a favorite condenser, which I won't mention, because then they go crazy.
I'm going to ask him after the cameras are off.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't really like the 57 thing, but I've used them, and if you have to, it'll work. But there's one dynamic I like, but I've used even U47s, a lot of U47 FETs, and as I mentioned, the 414s, whatever it takes on guitar.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. So let's go back a little bit. Led Zeppelin. How did that come about? They were traveling and they were doing a lot of overdubs across the country, right?
Well, the way it happened, it's another long, stupid, crazy story full of luck, which my things are just being in the right place at the right time. Our band, Bobby and the Originals, that I mentioned in Memphis, we would play all around the South, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, of course, and the Mid-South it's called. We'd play all around the Mid-South. And we were over at the old Ardent Studio, the home studio of John Fry. We recorded a couple of records, but he wanted to change. A guy named Jim Dickinson came in and was our first producer. And he had produced a couple of our singles, and they wanted a new name, Bobby and the Originals. There already is a band called the Originals, and whatever. So we looked for names, and found out early on the hardest thing in rock and roll is coming up with a good band name. Harder than good songs, a good band name. So we looked and discarded probably 5,000 names. Everything sounds stupid. The Beatles would sound stupid if it weren't the Beatles.
Yep.
The Rolling Stones would sound stupid if it weren't the Rolling Stones. So these names just didn't sound right. And one day my dad, I was there playing some of our songs on the home tape recorder, trying to think of a name. He said, why don't you just, the singer was Bobby Lawson, hence Bobby and the Originals, and there were 4 more of us. So my dad said, just call yourselves Lawson and 4 more. And I thought, ugh, that's the worst name of all. But I mentioned it, and somehow it stuck. And that became our name. So Lawson and 4 more, with me on keyboards and rhythm guitar, Bobby Lawson singing lead, Bill Donati on drums, Joe Lee on lead guitar, and the great Joe Gaston on bass guitar. We go out and we get to play on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour. One show, Fraser Skateland in far northeast Memphis. Dick Clark did these tours. He'd have real, well-known hit acts touring all over the U.S., and then he'd hire local bands to open these shows. And we were the local, we weren't in the Caravan and we weren't the Stars. We were the local band opening a show. But on this show was the Yardbirds. And I was so excited. All of us were. The Yardbirds. Wow. Yes, Gary Lewis and the Playboys were on the show. A couple of other acts were on the show, but we only cared about the Yardbirds. So, of course, the first chance I got, I was backstage where I could be now, and hanging out, meeting the Yardbirds. So when their next tour came, just the Yardbirds touring across themselves across the U.S., I went to the shows, every show I could go to that was nearby. And we had done a show, or the Yardbirds had done a show, and I had watched it in Murray, Kentucky, Murray State University. And at the end of that show, they were to get on their bus and drive the bus to Memphis, where they were going to catch a flight, I think to Houston, where they were going next. So I said to Jimmy Page, I'd gone backstage, Jimmy, hi, Terry, oh yeah, we talked, and how did you play that lick on, and he'd talk through things, you know. Of course, he knew about Stax, and he knew about the Memphis music and Memphis sound. That's what was interesting to him. I dare say he was as interested or more so in the stuff in Memphis music as I was in the Yardbirds. I mean, he loved that. So I said, well, Jimmy, why don't you ride back in the car with me, you know, and we'll talk more. Okay, because I was going to Memphis and we could meet up. So we got in the car and drove through the night. I guess that's about a 4-hour drive-ish, something, 4 or 5 hours. Drove through into Memphis, and I took him by Ardent Studios and got out my guitars, my 252 tellies and my amps and all this stuff, and we just sat and jammed and talked. You know, this is 3 or 4 in the morning, just talking it through. Showed in the studio. So Jimmy knew what I did. He knew I worked in a real professional studio that was recording hit records. He'd seen the equipment. He knew what the situation was. So a few months later, a year or 2 later, whatever, oh, that's right, they were still the Yardbirds. So when they formed Led Zeppelin, when he formed Led Zeppelin and brought the other guys in, and he had even asked me if I'd want to play in a new band he would be putting together. And I said, well, maybe. He said, I need a bass player too. I said, I could bring
You
Joe.
could have been John Paul.
No. I suggested Joe Gaston, my friend and bass player. And so we talked about it. And so he said, well, you could play keyboards and rhythm guitar, and Joe could play bass, and I'll look for a drummer, blah, blah. Of course, it wouldn't have been Led Zeppelin in that case.
No, I know.
It wouldn't have been anywhere close to the greatest rock band that ever graced God's green earth, you know. So it was just talking. But I said, no, I'm really doing great at Stax and in the studio. There's so much going on. How would I move to England? They said, well, you'd have to get a work permit, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, that didn't go anywhere. But he chose the right people and made the right band, and that became Led Zeppelin. Well, Jimmy would send me cassettes of what they were doing, the first album, the second album. And what do you think? It's going great. You're doing good, you know. And so when it was time for the third album, they went in to track it with Andy Johns, Glenn's brother. And Andy would be tired of hearing that. Actually, Glenn is Andy's brother. There you go. And they recorded it at Headley Grange and at Olympic quite a bit in London, but they didn't finish. They had a tour scheduled. So Led Zeppelin's got to tour America. You can't back out of the dates. It's all set. The album's not finished. What do we do? So Jimmy called me up. Would you help me out? Can we finish the overdubs on that album, then mix it and get it mastered so I can get it out? And at least the last half of our tour, we'll be touring for a new album. And I said, sure. So in between shows, they would play a show, let's just say Cleveland, I don't know where, somewhere. And at the end of the show, if they had more than a day off, he and whoever was needed would fly to Memphis. Always Peter Grant, the manager, came. Once Richard Cole, the road manager, came in, but he was needed out on the road more, so he usually didn't. They'd fly in, we'd overdub, whatever we needed, and then once that parts were done, we'd start mixing. And then they'd go back to the next show, fly back in. We did that 3 or 4, whatever number of times took to get the album mixed. Then I sequenced it together. We edited a lot on, I think, Gallows Pole. We did cut a lot of that out because it was pretty long. And just, you know, got it all sequenced and set. And at Ardent Studios on National Street, the old, not where Ardent is today, but the original public studio John had put in. Completely locked out, doors locked, nobody else ever coming in, just us working all night long, whatever it took to get it finished. Then I took it over to a place called Mastercraft in Memphis, a vinyl mastering facility that's no longer there, but got it mastered. We did 2 sets. I wrote the inscriptions, if you know about those, on the inner groove that Jimmy wanted. And then I took those all boxed up carefully, you know, put the way you would send it to a plant, 2 boxes, 2 sets, A side, B side, set 1, set 2, and drove them to Nashville because they were going to do a show at that point in Nashville. Jimmy rode up, and Peter Grant rode up, and we borrowed John Fry's Mercedes, and we drove it all up to Nashville, and I handed them over to Richard Cole, who then took them to the Atlantic pressing plants straight from there after that show. Drove them there, got it done. What a thing. And what my favorite thing, and I'll always give Jimmy huge thanks, and the incredible gentleman and lovely person that he is, he had said to me, I'll make sure you get a credit on the cover. I said, oh, well, good, thanks. Well, when they printed covers, they came back, they didn't have my credit on there. And they had, 500,000 of them printed up? The very intricate spinning disc, double open things cover. And Jimmy told Atlantic Records, bin those, burn them, make it again, put the Terry and Ardent's credit on the sleeve. And he actually, what did that cost him? But Jimmy did that to make sure I got the credit. And that was a very important thing to a career. I didn't realize it.
Yes.
But to your career, when a credit counted, which today it doesn't, we're so lucky, there were credits then. That's how people found you, you know.
Yes.
So thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate that.
No, that's absolutely amazing, and it's very huge that You know, one, clearly he thought of you as a friend and he wanted your opinion, but the fact that he, you know, made the effort to fly back and forth of through the country to finish that record with you, you know, that would have been a good feeling. But then that's the icing on the cake, you know what I mean?
Oh,
he wanted the
well,
world
you know,
to know you
they
did
could
it.
have gone to a studio in Cleveland, and then the next night, and chance they got a different studio in Indianapolis, and then the next time a different studio in another city, whatever. But he felt much more comfortable that he knew someone, knew the studio, felt like it was part of their home, sort of.
Did you ever get a chance to work with them again, or was it just...
Well, I went to many shows live. I've probably seen up to 50 shows of Led Zeppelin live, but we didn't work in the studio again, no.
You know, you talk about trying to end up in England and you decided to stay in Memphis, but at some point you did make your way over there, right?
Yeah, well, Jimmy had asked me, I want to put in our own studio. We'll call it Swan Song Studio or something, you know, what it was going to be. Could you put it together for me? So I went through equipment list, started looking at everything, and he was looking for places over there. We decided once again that it just was too much to come from another country to that country, get the equipment, put it, you know. So and then he said, plus, do we really want a studio? It's going well for us, let's not do that. So we didn't do that, but I loved England. I had gone there in 69, I went for the first time and just loved it. And I loved the British invasion. I loved all the British groups just as much as I loved the soul music I was working on out of Memphis. I loved the Yardbirds, I loved the Animals, I loved the Kinks, the Stones, you know, all of that stuff. It's just such great stuff. Joe Meek's things were just incredible, what he did. So as soon as I could get to England, I went, and I'd go every chance I got. And I'd go to, for instance, I went to a place called the Rainbow one night in England to see a band that I had just barely heard a little bit of, but they were another English band. I had a chance to see it. It was called Pink Floyd. And I thought, well, let's go see this show. Little did I know that show was the world premiere of Dark Side of the Moon, which had not been released. They were playing it to an audience for the first time ever at the Rainbow in London. And what an experience. I didn't know the music because it wasn't out. I hadn't heard it. But it's another thing that just sort of imprints on your memory. I'm sitting out in the audience waiting, and the whole audience is, and there are people, you know, talking, the lights are up, people are waiting and talking, and all of a sudden you just hear boom, boom, very low, and everybody kind of, what was that? Then slightly louder, boom, boom, and then the lights start dimming very slowly, and the heartbeat thing gets louder and louder, and I'd never seen a show begin like that. Just sort of, we are blanking with you, crowd. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's coming, you know. And by the time it had started and the music came, it was just overwhelming. And so I loved to go to England. I saw so many bands live there. Yes, audience. One of the greatest shows I ever saw there was Deep Purple at the Roundhouse, which, do you know the Roundhouse? It literally is a round venue, and kind of a low ceiling, and I was convinced the ceiling was going to come off. The crowd was so insane. This was just after Black Knight and their first real Ian Gillan, everybody going crazy stuff. They were so amazing. I'd never seen a show like that. So just to get all these experiences that you could get in England, in London, that I could not get in Memphis like that, to take back home and think and work on and put it into the whole pot of whatever I was doing, was amazing. And I ended up years later in the 80s, starting in the 70s, moved there and lived there for a while, then again in the 80s, lived in London twice for long periods.
And you had a chance to go and engineer at Abbey Road for a while, right?
Yeah, that was the second time of living in England. My manager, by that time I had a producer-manager, Jim Phelan. Hi, Jim. Love you. And he had come up with, my wife at the time was going to have a baby, and he had one job in England, and he said, "Can you go do this?" I said, "I can't just go when there's a baby happening at home. I've got to be there. He said, well, I'll find you some more jobs. Everyone can move there. You can have the baby there, which we did. My son was born in London, son Michael. So moved over there, and he said, where do you want to record? This was first group was called Fastway, which was Fast Eddie Clark, and they had been, it was a sort of a all-star band with Eddie leading it. And he said, where do you want to record? And I said, well, where else? Abbey Road. So I got an apartment on a street called Marlborough Place, which is about 3 or 4 blocks from Abbey Road Studio, and it's like a half block off of Abbey Road. So I'd walk through, I considered it every day for a year of going to Abbey Road and working. I considered it walking through the album cover to get there.
Yeah, across the...
Because I would come down toward the zebra crossing there. And it was just, I'm such a Beatle fan, such an English music fan. It's kind of silly, but that's what I wanted to do, just take advantage of it. So yeah, I did Joe Cocker, a group called Zeno, the Fastway stuff, maybe a couple of other things at Abbey Road. Hundreds and hundreds of sessions there in all of their studios. The Studio 2, which was where the Beatles did most of their things. Studio 3, which is where Pink Floyd did a lot, and Beatles recorded some. Studio 1, which is the huge orchestral studio. I did some orchestra work on Fastway in there. And then even Studio 4 at the time was upstairs, the penthouse, very top floor that they had put in. It's all changed now, what's where, I think. But just worked all over the building and got to know Abbey Road so well. There was I was almost always the last person out of the whole building at night, because the band would leave and I just stay working, doing comps or whatever it took to get ready for the next day, or just listening. And the only person on the whole property would be this lovely old guy who was the guard at sort of a guardhouse right outside the front door. And he knew I was in there, and I knew he was in there, but I also knew he slept most of the time. He'd just fall asleep at the guardhouse. So I would walk around the Abbey Road building, opening file cabinets, looking in things. I think it was the third floor was covered with file cabinets in the hallways. And I would open this is where the book, the first book that, I forgot the author's name, darn it, sorry. But he wrote about the Beatles and their recording things.
Brian Kehoe?
No, not Brian's, but later, great book, but the one before. Anyway, the guy who wrote that got most of the information from these file cabinets, because every session they ever did had notes in triplicate there, huge files. I found the Beatles sessions, Please Please Me session, whatever. Mr. McCartney ordered fish and chips at 3 p.m. Wow, I'm useless knowledge, but just reading, finding everything I could about things, and Winston Churchill sessions, and incredible stuff that went through Abbey Road. But I saw it as another home for me that I loved so much.
That's amazing.
Great building.
So by that time period, were most of the EMI consoles out of the building and they were mostly the EMI Neves, or did you still get a chance to engineer on some of the TG desks?
The EMI Neve was in 3,
yes,
where I did a lot of the Zeno album, a group from Germany. And they had just put the SSL in Studio 2.
Okay.
So the old things were gone out of there. The TG things were gone out of that. But it was mostly newer consoles. But I loved that Neve that was in Studio 3. That was a great desk. Nice wraparound. I loved the wraparound feeling.
Yep, and it had the very, very straight up back plane to it.
straight back. And there was a little window in Studio 3. When you're sitting at the Neve, you know where I mean, facing the studio, if you turn over this way, you come to another monitor console that
yes,
they had added to it. And then right over there on the wall was a window. And that window looked directly out on the zebra crossing, the crosswalk where the Beatles walked. And we would laugh so hard. Every day we would make little bets of how many guys are going to be out in the middle of the road standing and having their picture taken. And you'd look out, and I would swear every single time you look out the window, someone was out there. stopping traffic, getting their picture taken.
No, I mean, I went and did it, so
I walk through the cover every day, so there you go.
so that's absolutely amazing. And, you know, I've got tons of questions for all the information that we've had, but I just want to continue on a little bit as far as timeline goes. So while you're in London, is that when you met Chris Blackwell?
No, I had met Chris Blackwell through Muscle Shoals.
Really?
That sounds odd, but when I first met Chris, there was a band called Smith Perkins Smith that recorded at Muscle Shoals. They were part of a couple of the guys. Well, Wayne Perkins was the guitarist, and he was part of the Muscle Shoals musician group there. Later, even worked with the Rolling Stones some, and a well-known guitarist. And Steve and Tim Smith had this band, and they recorded as a production of Muscle Shoals sound. And it's a great album. It sadly disappeared, as some great albums do, in the music melange, the mess that's out there musically, music business. But it was on Island Records. Got signed to Island, and Chris had come to just sort of oversee some things. So I met Chris. Then when I was in London later, doing a lot of these things, I indeed thought, well, I'll go by and see Chris. So I went to Basing Street Ardent Studios, which later became SARM West, I think, of Trevor Horn's. But it was Chris's the Island studio at that time. And he met with Chris there. We talked over things and sort of just renewed, and, you know, how's Perkins Smith doing? Well, not great. But he showed me all, you know, the Helios boards that they had and all the stuff around there. And it was just another great indoctrination. And so that sort of cemented, in a small way, a relationship with Chris. He had many great music relationships with all the great people in the industry, but it just sort of put me on the list a little bit. Years later, and this would have been in the early 90s, because the Perkins Smith thing was in the 70s. And the reason I was involved in that is they brought it to me to mix at Ardent National Street in Memphis. They had me mix their Island record that they had done. So years later, when I'm in Memphis, have my own studio by that time called Studio 6, and I was ready to get out of Memphis. There were several reasons, a couple personal reasons and things. The weather, it had a rough winter, really cold, and I was sick of that. It gets really hot and very humid in Memphis in the summer, so I thought, gosh, let's go somewhere else. So I was thinking around, and I thought of Compass Point Studios, Chris Blackwell, Nassau, Bahamas, because I had almost gone there to work on AC/DC at one point, but then I had turned that project down and didn't end up at Compass Point.
Is this the Back in Black project that went down there?
No, not Back in Black. That was Who Made Who.
Okay.
Before Back in Black.
Okay.
And or was it after? Would have been after Back in Black.
Okay.
I guess.
Because Back in Black was done at Compass Point.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
The greatest rock album ever recorded in history.
That is the balance, in my opinion.
And soon to be the biggest selling album of all time.
Oh, man.
It will be, because it still sells, well, it was selling for many years, up until a few years ago, platinum every year, and may still be, except that people don't buy records now. They buy streams or something.
Still a platinum amount of streams on that
but
one.
Certainly platinum on that. But and then almost went with Billy Gibbons once to work on a Mick Jagger solo album, but then Billy's manager Bill Ham wouldn't let him do it, so I didn't. That was at Compass Point. So, but I knew of Compass Point through that, and I had sent off for their brochures and things and gotten that in the mail. So I just thought, oh, Chris, and I thought of putting a studio on an island. And I had visited Grand Cayman Island 2 or 3 times, really liked the place, and I thought, well, I'll put a studio here. I'd even gone back down there, met with real estate agents, found a couple of buildings, but I could not get the Caymanian government to understand what I was doing and why I needed special customs, get to have not have to pay the crazy customs duty they thought I had to pay to come in, like bring in equipment, and you'll have to pay 50% customs duty. No, I'm not going to do that. No one's going to do that. Although George Martin may have done it at Montserrat. But anyway, so I said, well, Cayman's not working. And that's when I thought of Compass Point. So I've called Chris up, and I called Holly Ferguson, who worked with Chris, had worked in A&R and ran his office and everything, good friend. And she said, yeah. And Chris and I started talking. And he said, Compass Point in Nassau is in bad shape now. Alex Sadkin, who had been running it, Alex Sadkin, great producer, engineer, mastering engineer, who had been running it as an employee for Chris, had been killed there in a car wreck. So he said, it's fallen almost into ruin since then. I won't allow people to book it because, it had been one of the top studios in the world. Rolling Stones, ABBA did some stuff, AC/DC, I can't even begin to, Judas Priest,
Jimmy
Iron
Buffett
Maiden.
went down there, right?
Well, he came later when I was there. Yeah, but it was huge. One of the top 3 studios in the world already, but down in because of there was no one there with music business acumen running it. And but Chris said, I would love to bring it back. You got to come down and look at it. So I was a pilot. I owned my own plane, so I flew it down to Nassau and met with Chris, and we just worked out a thing where we became partners in the studio. And started running it, I wanted to keep it looking basically like it did, because it had an old world look of wood and cloth and wood floors and things. I didn't want to go chrome and steel and new blue look and all that kind of stuff, which people were doing at the time. But it had to be really technically gone through. So I took all the studio equipment out of my studio in Memphis, flew it all down there. Chris had some great stuff there already, but we went through it all and had it completely refurbished, had great tech people come in and everything. And I went to the government there and met with the Minister of Finance and explained to him why I needed those customs exemptions. And that, see, they wanted to, both Cayman and the Bahamas, let's say Jimmy Buffett wanted to come record. Well, no, Jimmy didn't bring a lot of his own equipment. Let's say REM, when they came to Compass Point, they brought a full 40-foot container stuffed with their gear. That 99 road cases, big ones, stuffed with their gear. The governments in these countries wanted to charge you 50% customs duty on the value of that temporarily brought in equipment that was going out in a month or two. And so I had to go explain. Fortunately, at the time, they had a very intelligent, Harvard-educated Minister of Finance who I could really speak to about it. I explained that these are super tourists, because the word tourist to an island is everything.
Yes.
So I said, these are super tourists. They're not going to stay 2 or 3 days or a week. Some of them are staying for months. They're going to restaurants. They're staying in hotels. They're spending. But they're not going to do it if they have to pay 50% of the value of their equipment to you just to come in for a while. So they got it. And it's so funny because he said, well, look, here, I'm giving you this book. This book is our laws of the Bahamas. It has the customs laws here on page whatever. You go through those laws and tell me how they could be changed to your benefit. Now, I've been to law school. did all my own contracts after a few years, and so I knew a good bit about legalese and things. So I took the laws, I rewrote them the way I thought they should be that benefited me, and I said, here's my suggestion. He took that into the Senate, and they passed it word for word what I had written. I wrote a law.
That's amazing.
So we got the exemption to. We had to go and give them a carnet with the serial numbers and all that, but pay no duty, just a small stamp tax. And then when it went back out, we'd check it out, go show that it left. But it was a brilliant way to get by all that silly island crap that they wanted to do. So Chris applauded that, Chris Blackwell, and so we ran Compass Point for 20 plus years and had more great artists come in. It's staggering the big acts we had come in.
Oh, man.
If I started naming them, I'd leave out so many, but Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, Shakira, Julio Iglesias, Enrique Iglesias,
everybody for a while.
REM, Lenny Kravitz, and it just goes on and on and on.
Well, you just brought up one, Lenny Kravitz. And then you went after Compass Point, you did a lot of work with Lenny, right?
Well, Lenny had come to Compass Point to do an album that they called Circus, that Henry Hirsch, his engineer at the time, was working on with him, and came in, and it was a circus. Lenny brings a lot of people with him, and there's a lot going on, and it feels like a circus. They're jugglers. No, they're not. But he had me help Henry and get set up and do some things. It's another one of those freaky things that happened that cements a relationship and leads you to a whole new thing that you probably didn't have any business being in, but there you are. And I'm just lucky in so many ways. Henry had left. They had finished their album. Lenny, or maybe he hadn't even gotten there yet. Whatever was happening, Lenny had brought his dog with him, and he loved this beautiful German Shepherd type dog. Maybe it was a Malinois, I'm not sure, but beautiful dog down, and had rented a house that had to go out and find houses and places for all of our clients to rent. So I'm working on a George Thorogood and the Destroyers album. I'm working. I'm on the last day of mixing. It's just overwhelming. I've been in the studio for probably 2 days straight to get this finished on time. I'm just finishing around midnight one night, and I get a phone call from my then wife, who's passed away, but she at the time was my wife, and she said, "We've had a disaster at Lenny's house. He wants to come in the studio right now with you." And I thought, what? I'm so tired. I'm exhausted. What's the disaster? His dog ran out in the road and it got run over and killed. I said, oh no. What? Because I had told them, be very careful. This street is the main street that you're on. It's taxis all the time. So the dog was hit and killed by a taxi. Lenny had written a song about the dog's spirit going to heaven. It's called Where Are You Now? And he had to record it, because only recording that song will help him get over this and it was a horrible situation. Yes. Your dog is part of your family. You love them. I've got 3, and what could you do without them, you know? So what do? Okay, come on in. So Lenny came in. We went next door. Bjork was recording in the next studio, got a loop from her producer, and brought it over and had a drum loop set up there, and I set up a bunch of my Roland gear and different things, not Lenny's stuff at all that he was not used to working on. So he's going, a loop? What's a loop? You know, what? Because I do real things. I do play drum, I do it all. It's all real. It's like the 60s. I said, well, this is what we got. I said, okay, well, let's do it. So we record with a loop, plays from synthesizers and all these things, and do you have a whatever? No, but I have a sample of it. Sample, you know. So we do it, and he's growing and listening. He said, I like these things. This sounds good. It's about the music. You know, it's about the song, not the gear and the vintage of it. So I'm going through all that. Well, we worked probably 12 hours straight on this song and got it recorded. And it later, we didn't release it for Lenny. Later, we took his voice off and put Brandy's voice on, and it came out on the Batman whatever soundtrack, that very track. But Lenny loved it. We loved working with each other together. And when his next album came, what turned out to be the 5 album with Fly Away, he asked me to record it all. So I said yes. So I flew to New York to his studio in Midtown Manhattan in Murray Hill that he had put in, and we recorded for quite a while there. But the bad side of Lenny recording at his place in New York is that everybody else is in New York at one time to another. So Bobby Brown would come by, Madonna would come by, Chris Rock would come by to hang out with Lenny. And it stopped the session, so-and-so's here. I'm just, okay, fine. Pay me to sit and wait for them to leave, you know. But it really, finally one day I said to Lenny, we'll never get finished. He said, what do you want to do? I said, let's go to Compass Point. We had been probably 10 or 11 months working on this album there, and we're not even halfway through. So we went to Compass Point, brought a lot of his stuff in, used all of my stuff. This is his first time in Pro Tools. one of the early Pro Tools, fully recorded to Pro Tools albums. And I'd say in only 5 or 6 months we finished the rest of the album there at Compass Point, because you're isolated. There's not everybody in the world coming through like they do in New York. And we had a great time and just did it, and it turned out to his biggest album ever, with Fly Away just going through the roof. Interesting story on Fly Away. We had finished his album without Fly Away, without the song even. We had finished the album totally. Even I'd been to Ted Jensen in New York and mastered it at Sterling. It was done, put to bed. And Lenny was still down there, staying in the state. He loves the Bahamas. His family's from there. And so he's still hanging out, staying down there, and he comes in one day and said, "We need one more song." I said, "What do you mean? It's finished." He said, "No, I feel like there's a rock element missing, just a rock thing missing. All of his equipment's gone, his stuff all sent back to his storage places for touring." And I said, "Okay, because I've got tons of stuff, 100 guitars, 50 amps, just all this stuff." So I got out my gold top Les Paul. I got out a 65 Fender Deluxe Reverb amp, handed it to him. He goes out into the studio all alone, and I just watch him hitting chords, just thinking, hitting chords. And I'm just sitting and waiting, and he finally says, "I've got something. Hit record." So we just hit down, and he goes, dun, 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 dun. I've got these. "Oh, okay, that's cool, isn't it?" I said, "Yep, I've got it down now." So he played every instrument himself, one by one. We did him playing drums to the rough guitar track we had. He plays drums to it, dun, 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 dun. And we then take the best 8 bars he did, loop it together in Pro Tools. Then we use that as a click track. And he goes in and overdubs fills where needed, any accents, cymbals, everything, just to the basic track which he played, because it was funky, had a feel, but was still in time. So it's a great way to do a kind of a combination of getting a loop and playing real. So it was just worked so great. Then he played the bass over it, took my Fender Precision bass, played it through a little pedal thing, then did the guitars, did everything, then went out and sang it, made up I go back, he didn't have words yet. We'd had a great track. He takes the track, puts it on a CD, I guess, at the time, and goes out in his Jeep, which he still has, and he puts it in the player and just drives up and down the Long Beach areas, screaming at the top of his lungs, and comes up with the words to Fly Away. Comes back, "I've got the words, quick." So we went in and sang it, put it down, did harmonies, did a little editing, did the mix, added it up, went back to Ted Jensen with it, put this in, and it came out. And that, of course, that song done in one day was the song on the 15, 16 months album recording we had done that just went crazy through the roof.
Oh my gosh.
Wasn't even there until the last day.
After
everything.
After the record was mastered.
You never know. You never know.
So that is absolutely amazing. And on that project, were you working with Henry Hirsch as well?
No. It's just me and Lenny on the
Okay.
whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I had always heard, I want to talk about gear and all this stuff, but I always heard horror stories about the Helios that ended up.
Oh God, that's the desk that was brought in. Henry brought in. It was Lenny's.
Yes.
It may have been the island one.
Yep.
I'm not sure. It was one of the early Helios, or one of the island ones. But they brought it in, and it just made noises like you wouldn't believe. The hums, the cracks, the pops. It was in bad shape.
And then you guys got an API Legacy to finish out the record, right?
Not exactly. When we finished that record, they brought in Clive Caven, Sir Clive Caven from England, who's one of the great top techs, and he did everything he could to make that Helios board usable. And we got through and went into the next room with the Neve that I had in there, and also did some things in there. So it got done. But the API Legacy in New York, when we're recording the early parts of the 5 album, the Fly Away album, in New York, Lenny had a Trident A-Range there, which is a great board, one of the great sounding desks of all time. But I love API, and I wanted some API stuff, so I got with Paul Wolf, who at the time was the owner and running API, and he did up some modules and a lunchbox and everything for me, brought it in, and we recorded most of the rest of the things through the API. So the 5 album is Trident A range mixed with API. The standard, was it not the, I forget the model number.
The 550s?
The 550 Mike Priest, yeah. And then finally when we did the parts at Compass Point, it was through the my Lucas gear and the APIs, but I mixed through the Neve V3 that was in there.
Okay.
Which is okay to mix on, but you don't want to use the Mike Priest or especially the EQs on it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've had the chance to watch this industry really grow. When you first came in, people were making mono recordings commercially, correct?
Yep.
You know, so
Yep.
when something like the 4-track happened,
Oh,
everybody's minds had to have been blown.
we at Ardent, John Fry's studio, we had the first 4-track in Memphis that came in. It was a Scully 280 4-track.
Yep.
And it blows your mind. I mean, all these tracks, what are we going to do with them? Because you're used to mixing things together live, and then ending up with 3 tracks was the most you could have at the time. But usually, on the people that had 3 tracks, Willie Mitchell had one at High. I don't remember Stax ever having a 3-track, but it might have been. But with the people that had them were used to putting sort of a stereo, a pseudo stereo on 1 and 3, and keeping that 3rd track for the vocal.
Yes.
So you'd mix everything as you had always done to the other 2 tracks live, and the only thing you could overdub would be a vocal on that, because otherwise you were going up a generation by taking a pre-recorded thing and going back through a board with that, with the vocal live over the 2nd generation band track, which, well, a lot of hits, La Bamba, for instance.
Well, and you know, a man did that very famously, very close to here, right? Up in Clovis, New Mexico.
Oh yeah, sure.
You know,
sure.
and
Norman Petty.
Absolutely, and we're actually about to head up to Lubbock and go see Buddy Spot and go. You know,
Excellent,
yep.
excellent.
No,
Bobby Fuller, my great mentor and friend from El Paso, went there first to record. His very first thing, he went to Norman Petty. I want to record there. Decided that I'm better myself, and came back, and he was. But no offense to Norman.
No. Norman's records are interesting to me because it sounds truly like one microphone 12 feet away from someone.
Well, and the guy who did it very famously that Bobby Fuller also recorded with, Bob Keane,
Okay.
in Hollywood, who had his own labels, made the Donna label for Richie Valens, the Mustang label for Bobby Fuller, that had several of his own, pretty big producer at the time. And the way he did it, he was kind of the Los Angeles Joe Meek in a way, coming up with tech things, way to get ahead with new tech. But and a lot of people did this. They did it at Gold Star with Eddie Cochran and people like that. They would record a band track in the studio with all of the players. And then they could edit it as needed, do whatever, and they'd get it all down as the band track. Then they would play it back through a fader, or not a fader at the time, a knob, a channel on the board, and have the mic come live. So the singer could then do 1 take, 10 takes. In the case of Richie Valens, I understand, they did up to 100 takes of things to get, but it's always to the same band track.
Yep.
So when you went to edit, you were comping by editing the band track with the vocal over it to get the best vocal for that section of the song or section of tape. And so they're comping by editing the tape, because the band track's always the same. You can find that same spot. And it's kind of brilliant, really, the way it worked out. But I think Norman Petty probably did that
Yes.
kind of thing. Get the band track, and then any overdubs, you're going back through the board.
Yep.
The downside, of course, if it is a downside, is that the band track itself is now a generation lost, a 2nd generation of tape, extra tape hiss, extra potential distortion. But in many cases, it's a good thing. So there you go.
You know, and all of those things, you know, balancing generation loss and you know, track sharing and stuff like that, those are arts that are they're becoming lost.
As you were saying, when the 4-track came in, you very quickly leave the awe of you had this extra track or extra 2 tracks into I need even more, because we all know what you do. My favorite quote in many ways that John Fry said once we got the 4-track and then we're thinking 8-track, he's going, I have an equation. He spoke like Jimmy Stewart. I can't do it. I have an equation, because he was a mathematician as well. If the number of tracks available equals n, the number of tracks required equals n plus 1. And I said, yeah, that's right. You always need one more track. But he had quantified it down to an equation there. But I'd say the big jump was when we went to 8-track, really. Mm-hmm. Because 4 is one thing. You're still mixing a lot of things together on that initial session.
The 4-track era for you guys has always been interesting to me because the photos of Ardent, there's a lot of mystery there.
Most of which I took.
Well, absolutely. We got to get into that because, you took a lot of photos around Memphis,
yeah, true.
And there's some great photos that, I love, like the Dusty Springfield sessions and stuff like that. But at Ardent, there was 4 monitors up at the top wall. And I have heard this story that each monitor played one of the tracks back.
That's what we thought. When we got the 4-track. See, we had always had, we never had a 3-track. So we'd always had mono, a 1-track Ampex, or a 2-track Ampex.
Yep.
That's what we had. So we put in the new studio just when the first 4 tracks came out, and we got the Scully. We thought, well, we've always had 2 speakers, 2 monitor speakers for those 2 tracks. We have 4 tracks. Obviously, we need 4 speakers. Well, you see, it's all brand new.
Absolutely.
There's no benchmark to go by of other studios. It's all new. We're just trying to think it through. What do we do here? We're used to 1-track and 2-track, and at most 2 speakers. But wow! So we got 4 AR speakers, AR3s. Were they?
They look like AR2s to me, but
AR2.
Yeah.
I don't know model numbers that well. They don't mean numbers don't mean much to me, but because it's what it does and what I do with it and songs I care about. But so I guess it was AR2s. We got the AR2s and put them up there, 4 of them, and we would play back each of the 4 tracks out of these 4 speakers, because it hadn't dawned on us yet. It could just be reduced to 2 right in the board, and that's all we need. But it did pretty soon. So we put them up there, and of course we've got, coming out of one speaker now, we have drums and bass blasting on a home stereo speaker at pretty good level with big Marantz amps and things, and Macintosh amps and ARs, not ARs, Dynacos and things, amps. So they're just blasting on them. Well, what is a raw bass guitar and bass drum going to do to a home speaker at level like that?
Rip it apart.
There it goes. It's gone. So we got them from a hi-fi store called Opus some number in Memphis. At the time, the hi-fi shop, audiophile hi-fi shop. We got them from there, and so once a week or even more, we'd be walking back into the store. We return this under warranty, get a new speaker, and after several of these, they're going, what are you doing to these speakers? We've never had these blow up. So I brought the people from the hi-fi store over and played them. They're just going, oh my God, these speakers won't handle that. You're going to have to find something meant for sound reinforcement. What's that? Sound reinforcement. We were thinking hi-fi. And so John did his research, and we ended up with JBLs, 43-somethings.
11s?
No. Those are small. These were the big things.
Oh, okay.
This wide,
okay.
That tall. I don't remember model numbers again, but
no, it's all
kind of
good.
at the time became a studio standard quickly, monitor speaker, and I still love those speakers. They're just great. And we put 4 of those up. And I remember we had poles come down from the ceiling, and then we'd drill holes into the speakers.
Yep.
Just to attach them to these poles until we realized the speakers were sealed, and we were drilling holes into that and ruining those. Oh my God! So we had to buy new ones and fill the holes, and we were just babes in the woods. We didn't know. There was no one to call and find out. We were making it up as we went along, and we had techs. Rick Ireland was the main one, who would need something, would need a direct box or need to get a phantom power or something done, would say, we need to make this. Oh, okay, we'll think it through and we'll make it up. So I came from, that's how I started doing the Lucas stuff later. I came from an early school of, if you need it, you think it, you make it. You know, so, and I hear my phone making a noise. I should have canceled it, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But,
you're totally fine.
So yeah, we had the 4 speakers, and then finally, I don't remember who was the genius who finally realized, duh, it's going to end up stereo or mono anyway. So we took that down and had 2 speakers, and that's when we figured it out.
So I got to ask though, was like Led Zeppelin or ZZ Top or any of those records mixed on the 4 speakers? Or?
Well, of course, I used the 4. When you're mixing, we would go to stereo.
Okay. So this is
only using 2 of them at that point.
Okay.
70, probably 1970 was the Zeppelin 3, I'm guessing. I don't remember if we had I probably had gone to 2 speakers by then.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but maybe not.
So when, you're working in Memphis, you're clearly part of that community. And that led to a lot of interesting stuff. There was a lot of people who came down to Memphis to make records, but also you traveled down to Muscle Shoals a lot as well to go see what was happening.
Some, not a lot. But,
I'm curious on how those communities interacted with each other.
Well, first of all, when you think Memphis alone, it was a real family feel around Memphis. There was Stax. Then a little bit later, there became Ardent, which we put in. And the other big place that we all thought of, there were 2 other places at the time, early times, there of course was Sam Phillips, who had left the Sun studio, original studio at 706 Union, and put in his Phillips studios on Madison. So there was that as a big studio. There was High, which we all called High. People now call it Royal. It was the Royal Theater before it became a studio. High Records was their label, and Royal Studio or
You're talking
High,
about Royal Recorders.
Royal, which was Willie Mitchell's place
Yes.
later on. But early on, it was Joe Coogie's place.
Okay.
A white guy, Italian guy, who had recorded a lot of hits there, including Willie Mitchell's band, the Bill Black Combo, several other things that were on the High label, distributed from London out of New York, London Records, which was part of Decca, I think, worldwide. But that was a big studio, and it was very familial feeling between Stax and High. For one thing, some of the musicians were the same. Al Jackson Jr., the greatest drummer of all R&B, certainly, and maybe close to of all time. Drummer there, the Human Metronome, who was Booker T and the MG's drummer, and the Stax session drummer with the rest of the MGs as a rhythm section. He was also the drummer at High for the big sessions, along with another great drummer, Howard Grimes. They, some of the musicianship, the Memphis Horns would play at Stax, they'd play at High, all that sort of thing. So that was very close-knit family feeling there, especially once Willie Mitchell was in charge of it. Then when Ardent came into being, and Willie would bring Al Green things over for me to mix at Ardent. Somehow, I don't know why, I really don't know why, but Ardent became the mix place, and I became the mix engineer early on, talking in the 60s here, mid-60s. So I would mix a bunch of the Stax things for Steve Cropper or Booker or whatever, but Willie Mitchell had heard some of these, and they just liked the way it sounded. I kept hearing from people that the things you mix are louder on the radio, which was, of course, as always, the loudness wars were already started to some degree. But, okay, I don't know why, but Willie started bringing Ann Peebles, Can't Stand the Rain, that kind of stuff, Al Green, Let's Stay Together, and so many of his things, the big singles, and then even some album tracks later too, over for me to mix at Ardent. Now, when I say mix for Willie Mitchell, Willie is in control. I mean, I learned so much from him on another angle. For instance, I would sit at the board, he would sit right next to me, would start playing the track, he said, just do your mix, do what you think it ought to be. So I'd be mixing and all that, and he said, sounds good, but I don't feel it yet. And I said, excuse me, feel it? What? He said, I don't feel it here. Oh, sorry, there's a mic there.
No, that's fine. It'll just have more impact.
Good, it had the sound effect. So I don't feel it here. It's not hitting me. And I thought, damn, there's something else here I don't know. What is this? And he said, no, it needs to jump. I need to feel it. And I later, over the years, noticed when we're mixing for Jimmy Page, when it got right, he would start moving his shoulders like this, standing at the board or behind the board or next to me or whatever. He'd start moving his shoulders. And Willie would start moving this thing, Willie Mitchell. And there's a feel element. It's not all technical, is it? So what Willie explained to me was that, said it's usually in the bass and the bass drum together, and it hits you here in the gut. It's just something, and it's not volume, it's just the way it hits you. And I said, is it emotion? He said, yes, it's emotion. So I'm going, okay, I've learned all this technical stuff, or thought I had. There was still some to go. From John Fry, Jim Stewart, whoever, Cropper, learned all these things. I should mention Ron Capone, too, another great engineer at Stax. And I've learned these technical things, and now there's this whole new thing called feel or emotion that Willie's talking, because no one else had talked about that to me. So I started bringing the bass up and the bass drum and finding a way that they talk to each other, but neither one overpowered the other. And he's, yes, you're getting it. So just it's this whole learning thing. And these are still from 4-track at that point. And pretty soon we go to 8-track, first 8-track again in Memphis that John got for Ardent. Always trying to be ahead of the curve, studying what do they do in London, what do they do in Hollywood, what do they do in New York. Just because we're in Memphis doesn't mean we can't be right up there. That was his philosophy. So I forget what any question was. I'm just talking.
No. The question really was, we're talking about the communities and how involved
yes.
they were, and right now I'm getting a great picture of what it was like in Memphis. But there's other things that I've always looked from the outside, which is clearly people were making similar gear decisions. There were a lot of Spectrasonics consoles that were running along.
Well, okay. When I was talking about the studios of Memphis and started on another rant, got off topic, I was about to mention American Studios.
Yes.
Which was Chips Moman.
Yes.
And Don Cruz, and then the incredible musicians they had, which were, except for the horns and the strings, were somewhat separate from the musicians that were at the other studios. It was kind of Chips's group with Dan Penn and Spooner Oldham, and then the incredible Reggie Young, who had started out as a teenager at Royal Studios, and then got kind of pulled over to Chips's American place. But yes, Spectrasonics, the consoles we all used were made in Memphis. The place I mentioned years ago when we were talking with Pepper Tanner Jingle Studios was very technical. This was a big outfit. They were full of Neumann. They had their own studios. They had Neumann and Shep Shep's mics. They had great equipment. But they had a guy there named Welton Jatan, who was a technical genius, a sound engineer, but even much more of an electronics genius. He started making a lot of their gear for them. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we made things that we needed it. So John Fry got with Welton Jatan and said, we need boards for our new studio. So Welton started looking around. He found a guy in Utah named William Dilley, who had a company called Spectrasonics that he had started up. He made a deal with Dilley to make use Spectrasonics parts, their 101 boards, a lot of their other internal things, but he would put it together and wire it and do the routing and the way things went through it and all. Welton would do that in Memphis. So he started a company, and it became Spectrasonics by Autotronics in Memphis, which Autotronics was Welton's company name. And we'd go over there constantly and look at blueprints and talk technical things, and because we ordered 1, 2, 3, at least 4 consoles, probably 5 Spectrasonics by Welton Chaton boards at Ardent alone. Stax got at least 2, probably 3 or more. And yeah, these things started getting around. It was this, and pretty much once we got a Scully, everybody else was getting Scullys. They suddenly appeared at Stax. Chips Moman got a Scully, 4-track, and I think an 8-track, I'm pretty sure. There's so many, I've been in so many studios and so many things of gear, I can picture it, but I can't get every picture just perfect of who had what when. But yeah, I was very lucky. I got to travel down some to Muscle Shoals. They were also part of our family, although it was a different set of musicians and engineers, because it was close, because it was Southern, and also there was Rick Hall at Fame. All of these people, Rick would bring things up for me to mix at Ardent in Memphis. The Muscle Shoals people would bring up things for me to mix. It's so weird when you become something and you don't even know why you became it, or even at that time, that you became it. Now we can look at Andy Wallace or a Bob Clearmountain, or you can say, they're the mix engineer of the time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. For some odd reason, I became the mix engineer at a time, and I didn't even know it. I was just going every day and working, you know.
That was really before there was a mix engineer.
Well, there wasn't such a thing. So
Yes.
was I the first?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's stories that I hear like this, because I heard of you working on other people's tapes. But the way that people talk about it, everything, it's not that I want to say that it's downplayed, but it's just day-to-day life where they would say, oh, I took a tape over to Terry to have me cue it.
Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't. We did, you know, only later did the music business, in my opinion, and sometimes I'm wrong, but in my opinion, only much later in time, we're talking probably in the mid-70s, did engineering, doing things to tapes, mastering, not even thought of special at the time. But only later did those things become anything special or to be lauded or looked upon. We were just doing our jobs.
Absolutely.
Everybody was just going to work. And if you needed to master something at Stax, finally, after mastering other places, we finally got a Neumann lathe in, and Larry Nix came in and took it over and started running Stax mastering inside the Stax building on Macklemore, and we'd just walk in there and do it. But it wasn't looked on as Bob Ludwig. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Even though it should have been.
Yes.
But we just didn't think of it like that. And it's weird how the industry...
It was just more localized. You were the
Well,
Bob
yeah, we were
Ludwig.
local, but we were regional local.
No, but I'm just saying, you know, those people looking for the Bob Ludwig, they were looking for the people who were talented locally, and they found you. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, yeah, I guess so. But we got so many things. For instance, one thing Rick Hall brought up from Fame to mix, and I didn't think of it anything special at all. And in fact, I thought it was kind of a silly song. But it was the Osmonds and their first big hit, the One Bad Apple, was it? Mm-hmm. One Bad Apple, you know, and I didn't even love that kind of music necessarily, but it had great musicianship, great singing, went to #1 on the charts, okay, didn't even think of it. Oh, I mixed a #1 record. Don't think of that. It's just, Rick brought up this odd group. And so, and I didn't even remember working on the Osmonds for many years. My wife today is a huge Osmond, Donny Osmond and Marie fan. She, growing up as a girl in Scotland, loved the Osmonds and their music. And so I mentioned, finally thought, oh, you know, I worked on what? You know, but I didn't think of it as a special thing. The business wasn't like that.
It was Tuesday.
It was exactly what it was. Jan Winter brought in a new album. He went as a producer. Of course, Jan Winter, the founder, owner, whatever, of Rolling Stone magazine, and then later the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He calls up and says, "Oh, I've got this guy. I've recorded in Muscle Shoals, and they said I should bring it to you to mix." Okay, whatever. So he brought up the first Boz Scaggs album. He's from San Francisco or wherever he's from. It's not Memphis. And Jan Winter is darn sure not from Memphis. It's just craziness. One night, I finished a session on Rufus Thomas. And it was a vocal session, and I thought, I'm not going to tear the mic down. I'm going to leave it all set up. They might come back tomorrow for more, who knows. And I'm about to lock the door. This is at Ardent on National Street. I'm about to lock the door and go home, and the telephone rings. And, hello, is this Ardent? I said, yeah, hi. Who am I speaking? This is Terry. Oh, good, because I was trying to find you. And I said, okay, what's up? I want to do a vocal on a song tonight. I said, tonight? I just finished vocals. It's like 10 p.m. I'm tired again, ready to go home. And I said, well, you don't turn down business and things. He said, okay, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in Nashville. It'll take me 2 hours to get there. Can you wait? Okay, so I waited. It turns out a band is called Mother Earth, but just the singer, Tracy Nelson, comes in. And she comes in, and we do one song, which is Down So Low. And she goes in. I said, I've got a mic set up right there. Well, it's already set up. I said, yeah, Rufus Thomas was singing here. Oh, just crazy about it. And when she starts singing, I'm going, holy hell, this is amazing. This is pretty good. But that's the kind of thing that would just show up at the door. One time, one song, one late night, gone. You don't even think about it. And then later, it's on the radio. It's pretty good. Oh, Linda Ronstadt's covered it. Oh, it's just weirdness. But today, everything has to be, you have to be something special. It has to be planned. You have to use certain gear. And I don't know. It's
take some of the fun out of it?
It does take some of the fun. It was not even a job then. I don't even remember what I got paid for any of these things.
No,
and I don't care.
And I'm trying to live my life a little bit more like you. I've just been calling musicians randomly and being like, okay, we're going to track it about an hour and a half, and just let them go.
Have fun.
Yep.
Music should be about fun. The song, it should be something that started in someone's, well, it's crazy to say, but their heart. Of course, it came from their mind, their whatever, but it's ideally, it's an emotion that some writer or singer-songwriter or whatever came up with, and they wanted to emote it.
Yes.
And so your job is to go, there's something special out there, and it's emoting, and my job now is to capture it, or to, in the case of a producer, to make it as good as it can be, the artist can be, and I want to get it on a medium, transfer it, and get it out, and other people can hear it and go, oh, that touches me right over here. I feel what that person thought. Now that's glorified, and it's sort of the best of all the worlds together, but really that's what it ought to be. Mm-hmm. Fun in doing all this.
Yes.
I think of the Staple Singers sessions where we did I'll Take You There and Respect Yourself, and so many great songs they did. When I think of those sessions, I first think of the laughter, the fun with Mavis and Pops and the whole group, everybody. But we had so much fun bringing in, I'm a vegetarian and was then, and vegan really, but they'd bring in buckets of chicken and whatever, people handing Cokes and everybody just having fun, eating, drinking, talking, laughing, and then singing, and then emoting.
That's amazing.
It's just, yeah.
And I couldn't imagine what it's like to be a part of a family that is not only the studio that you're in, but really the whole of the Memphis music community,
Memphis, I look back now, and we've all seen some pretty bad things that have happened in Memphis, starting in the 60s, but even recently a couple with Tyree Nichols, for instance, and you never know what's going to happen. It's definitely got its downsides, and it had some of that then. But what a school to think of! I want to go to recording school, or producing school, or engineering school, or whatever. I got accidentally into the best one that could ever be. Yeah, okay, you can say L.A. and the Wrecking Crew and all that going on, but I think it was because it's a much bigger city and was a bigger industry itself with the labels there. In New York, the same, millions of people instead of hundreds of thousands.
Can I give you my personal opinion?
Yes,
on it?
please.
You know, growing up in Detroit, I always equated to what you guys were able to accomplish to what, Barry was able to accomplish and the people at Sigma in Philadelphia were able to accomplish. Yep. And how I looked at it is that New York and LA were a given. There were going to be records coming out of those cities, and the world was going to hear them. But what you
just
did,
because.
Yeah, but what you did and what Barry did, you had to work to get over the surface. You had to be so great that it was undeniable.
Wow, that's exactly so well put.
Yeah, I truly believe that.
That is so true, and what Barry did up there, and even when they went to Hollywood, there were great things coming out, but it still wasn't home.
No, it wasn't Detroit.
Wasn't home. Wasn't Detroit. I worked at a studio. Oh, what was the name of it in Detroit?
United Sound?
No, it wasn't United. It was out Pampa.
Oh, okay.
Do you know Pampa?
I've never heard of it. No.
A guy who had been one of the tambourine players at Motown ran it.
Okay.
And we took some staple singers up there, a whole album, and did full orchestra with the Motown Symphony, the Detroit Symphony players that came in. And it was so fun and different just to get, so this is Detroit. And it works like this.
Yeah.
Because they were our rivals.
Yes.
Pleasant rivals. I don't mean that we didn't like them.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. Never forget. I got picked up for school by a guy named Alan, who later became my brother-in-law. And because Johnny Hughes, that was his best friend, and he picked me up one morning to ride to school. And I'll never forget, we get to the corner of a certain street that I know exactly where it was, and we had the radio, and out of the radio all of a sudden comes dum 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 dum, and I just remembered dong. What is that? That is great, and it's such a hit, and it's one of those all-time things. The second you hear it, you know where you were, you know the instant, you know the people that you were with. You'll never forget. Such a great recording and song and playing and everything. And I've always thought and said that in Memphis, we didn't know any of that for the first few years. I say we because I was there fairly early, but not right at the beginning. I came in 64-ish, and they had been going maybe a couple of years. But I was there pretty early, and a part of it, I still feel a real Stax family connection. And there's a huge TV series, 4-part series about to come out, the history of Stax.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
On HBO, done through Sony, and it's going to be amazing.
Are you in it?
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
And it's coming out probably August if we're lucky.
Oh, I can't wait to watch.
But this year, 2023 is the year for it. But, I've just lost a train of thought. But Stax didn't know. We'd hear the radio, we'd hear My Girl and whatever on the radio and go, oh, that's so good, and love it, whatever. We'd hear Philly stuff. They had some great stuff. Chicago had some good stuff, the Shy Lights and things. Mm-hmm. You'd hear things on the radio, chess stuff, sure. But we didn't think we were part of that somehow. We didn't copy it. Everyone in Memphis was doing the Memphis thing, their own thing. The MGs, which I think of as the single greatest rhythm section of all time. No offense to Jamerson and the guys at Motown, but when you think of Booker T and the MGs, you can think of the multitude of hits they played on. So many as the rhythm section. But they also had their own records as artists, and they toured, and they played big shows, and then they came back to the studio and played other people's stuff. And I can't think of anybody. The Wrecking Crew didn't do that. Motown guys played out, but they were jazz players Jamerson especially, a lot of them.
And they also stopped touring by the time they got to LA. You know what I mean?
But I think of a really special, and I'm biased, of course, but I think of a really special thing as a hit rock group, Booker T and the MGs.
Well, and that's the big thing too. Is like, you know, the Funk Brothers, they went out and they toured with bands, you know, with the artists, but they never had Glass Onions. They never cut a single of their own that went and did anything
and
significant.
the MGs had many hits.
Yeah.
Soul Limbo, which I played on.
Yeah.
Hip Hugger, their version of Mrs. Robinson, Time is Tight. There's so many things as hit records. Top 10 singles.
Yep.
Then album sales. I'm amazed by it. Well, what I was getting at is we didn't think of copying other people per se. We were doing the Deep South, funky soul. If you listen to Motown, and I love so much of that, what they did, there's a sheen on it. There's a pop element.
Absolutely.
That wasn't on Stax's music.
No, and
Stax's music was gut bucket
and grind,
soul.
Yes.
Deep with that emotion, feel, punch thing happening. It's all one part of R&B, but it's still different. Muscle Shoals was a little different, but still part of that same thing. But what I'm getting at is when the MGs, Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Eddie Floyd, whoever it was, all those for sure, that went on 1967 on the tour of Europe, they get off the plane at Heathrow for the first time. Probably, I don't know for sure, but probably the first time any of them had been out of the country, out of the U.S., or very far out of the South, or very far out of Memphis. But get off Heathrow Airport in London, England, and there are people with signs cheering and waving, mobs of people, and they look up and go, what the blank is that? They're for us? And they play these shows, and you've probably seen some of it on the YouTube replays and things, of the people screaming and going nuts, and the shows are just over the top excitement. And they didn't realize they were big hits. Even you get record sales and you see the charts, but something about it didn't penetrate the Memphis mind quite until when they came back to Memphis. I didn't go because I was in the studio. I was working on stuff. I didn't get to go on tours, you know. Yeah. They come back and you won't believe it. They love us in other countries, in other towns. We're stars. But only then did it sort of start seeping into people's minds of, this is something. But isn't that odd?
I think it's amazing.
When you think of Otis Redding, just for one artist, and we all look now and go, historic, incredible, Dock of the Bay. I mean, the day Steve mixed that, I was there with him mixing it. And you just go, you look back and you go, we didn't think of it then. We weren't even going to release it right away. Well, the reason we were in there to finish it is because a week earlier Otis was killed, and Atlantic's calling up and said, we can capitalize on this. We need a single. I mean, that hurts you.
It does.
He's our friend. He's Steve Cropper's best friend. They're writing partners.
Steve's playing the guitar on that song.
And if you listen deeply to the guitar on Dock of the Bay, it is incredible.
It's incredible.
I've never heard any other guitar do what Steve's does on Dock of the Bay. And you don't think of a guitar song when you think it. You think of Otis and it's whistling and singing and whatever. That guitar is unbelievable.
It's incredible. And it makes me want to buy a Fender Harvard. I got to ask, with your massive gear collection, you got a Fender Harvard?
I don't have a Harvard. I've got Tremolux. I've got an old Bassman, the tweed one.
Well, I just bring it up because
many of them.
Steve always made the joke that he recorded all those songs with the Fender Harvard. Is that actually how that went down?
It could be there were Fender amps only in the studios.
Yep.
We didn't have any. Were there other amps? We didn't even know. At Ardent, we had a Showman and a Deluxe and a Bassman. You know, the black, the two-piece Bassman.
Yep.
And stuff. By that time, it's all we had. It's all you did.
So when it came to Ardent and Stax, did you guys share concepts and ideas like microphone choices and placement and stuff like that? Or did you take, what Stax was doing and then just walk it over to Ardent because you were at both?
Partly that. John Fry had, I will give him so much credit. He had done literal book work, not gone to any school. There weren't recording schools, but he had done book work of microphones and microphone techniques. And he would then show me and other people who were wanting to learn what a pattern was, how it picked up, where it picked up from, why you would choose a certain mic with a certain pattern for a certain task. And other than that, we just kind of made it up. Ronnie Capone at Stax would come over to do some engineering at Ardent, and he would bring his, not microphones, but his concepts that he had done over there. Or I would take things I learned at Stax and bring it back, or likewise things John had mentioned, or I'd learn myself at Ardent and go over to Stax with it, or to wherever.
That's amazing.
We share. You mentioned Dusty Springfield in a photograph I took. It's another long story, but you can edit. So
we will. But go right ahead.
I was working as a photographer at the New Musical Express, which is the top music newspaper in England, based in London, England, NME. And the reason was because I loved the British invasion and the Beatles so much, I would subscribe to NME and get it. So when I just called up their editor at one point and said, hey, I'm here in Memphis, I'm a photographer, groups come through, anything comes to the U.S. you want stories on, you don't have to send somebody, I'll go shoot it and write a story. And he said, okay, give that a shot. So he calls me up and says, hey, Dusty Springfield is coming to Memphis to record with some guy named Chip. I said, yeah, Chip's Moment, yeah. He said, oh, okay. So why don't you go over and cover it and we'll see if it works. I said, yeah, I'll do that. So didn't even have a press pass or anything, but I knew Chips. I knew all the people at American. We're all part of the Memphis music family. So I just go over and I can walk in the session, and here comes Dusty. And I said, hi, I'm from NME. NME? Here in Memphis? Because Memphis, in her mind, was the end of the earth, an outpost. Because she had been working over at Olympic and doing all the great stuff, the Bacharach songs and things that they did over there, and with great people, with Keith at Olympic, but Keith Grant. But so I just said, yeah, I'm based in Memphis, but I work for NME. And she said, oh, okay. So I took some photos and I said, I'll be taking more. Okay. Well, Tom Dowd was the engineer. And I knew Tom from his going to Stax and thinking, well, no, I won't say anything. Anyway, we weren't in love with the Atlantic people, except Tom was the best.
Yes.
The main people at Atlantic, we felt they were taking great advantage and ended up, if you know the story, took huge advantage of Jim Stewart and Stax in what we called carpetbaggery. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I said, hey, Tom. He's, oh, hi, weren't friends, but had seen each other. And thought, oh, that's that kid from Stax. So anyway, I'm taking photos. And at one time, Tom's, hey, would you come over here, Terry? I said, yep. He said, I'm having some troubles, microphone not working over there, headphones over there, and this isn't the highest tech studio in the world. Wink, wink. Said, would you go out and see what you can do? So I ended up being assistant to Tom on the Dusty and Memphis album. Not a lot, but doing a few things and photographing the whole thing. Ended up with, well, I took a lot of photos, but of course you choose. But there were a couple, one in particular that is just shows Tom and Dusty, and it's, if I say so myself, it's a spectacular shot. It's as they're listening back to Son of a Preacher Man band track with a guide vocal. And it's been printed and reprinted in many magazines and stories and whatever, but
the one where she's leaning over and he's got the shorts.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful
and she's
photo.
beautiful with her wig on and everything, doing her Dusty bit. But I was in awe of all that, and a real English female songstress. And to me, she was 9 feet tall. That was the family thing. You could just walk in a different studio with a totally different session and be part of it in a small way, because everybody knew everybody. The American, it's coming around more now, but the American studios group of people hasn't been quite lauded enough. The Stax people are, yes, and that's great, certainly deserve it more than anybody in the world. Willie Mitchell's whole scene has been quite a bit, and that's totally deserved. Sam Phillips, of course, this is a bit earlier when he did the 706 Union, but that's history in a different way. And I mean, I knew Sam well, of course, and hung out some at the Phillips studio, but not near as much. Later, there was a place called Sounds of Memphis that came in that became quite a good studio. It changed its name to Kiva later. But, you know, there have been studios all over Memphis, but it's all a family. It's all more a family. It's as you said, than anywhere probably than Motown. I'm sure everybody there, but that was really where there weren't that many studios in Detroit and Motown itself and United, right?
Yeah, Motown, United. There was the place where Russ and Mike Terna came from. That was, what was that, Golden World or something like that?
Don't know the name.
That ended up being bought and it turned into Motown Studio B, but that was an independent studio. But for really the most part, you know, the big independent studio in Detroit was United. It wasn't even Motown, you know.
Independent, right.
Yeah,
they did only their work.
Well, I mean independent in any way, shape, or form. You know, I think it's very, very fitting that you ended up with Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones down in Memphis and Muscle Shoals, because Barry wouldn't let them in the fucking door.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
that studio was closed.
Yeah.
So
well, I don't blame him.
Yep.
To be honest, Stax didn't let many people in. Atlantic brought some of their people in because they were the distributor for Stax until they raped the company. But they would bring in Wilson Pickett, for instance, who was not a Stax artist.
Yes.
And Steve would co-write or write something like Midnight Hour, a little song Steve did, and they would record it until they just couldn't take any more of Wilson out. Then they did the Barry to him.
Yep.
But one group that called up, and this is one of my big regrets ever. Brian Epstein called up Jim Stewart at Stax and said, the Beatles really want to record at Stax. And I know you're not a for rent studio, whatever, but we'd love to come in and cut. What do you think? Track, you know. And Jim thought about it, got with Al Bell, who was the vice president at that time. Later, Val became the president and later the complete owner. But they were a team from almost early on that ran it. And Al said, absolutely, we should do this. They're really big. And he said, I tell you what, my guy, which was me, Terry, I did all of Al's recording, and Staples and other things. And he said, I'll get Terry to engineer it because he knows the pop sensibilities and he loves the Beatles. And Jim said, that's great, this will work. So Al came to me and said, would you like to work on a Beatles song? And I thought about it. I said, nah. No, I didn't. I said, hell yes, what are you talking about? So it was all set. But Brian Epstein had said, one thing is the absolute must. No word about it, no publicity. It's got to be completely quiet until we finish it. What they were going to record is Got to Get You Into My Life for Revolver. And so he said, we swear it will be kept absolutely quiet. Well, Jim's sister, Estelle Axton, it's Stewart, S-T, and Axton, A-X, is Stax, the two people's names. They're brother and sister, and they were the co-founders of Stax. And she sold out later and sold her part to Al Bell. But she was somewhat of a character, ran the record shop, Satellite Records next door, and got so excited about it, you almost can't blame her. She went to the newspaper and gave a story, and it appeared in a small column in the Memphis Press Scimitar newspaper. Beatles are going to record at Stax. Well, when Brian Epstein found out about that, he said, I'm sorry, we have to cancel it. Keep it all, it's not going to happen. So if you listen to Got to Get You Into My Life, you can hear George Martin's attempt at a Memphis horn arrangement. Mm-hmm. But he couldn't do a Memphis horn arrangement because nobody else could.
Yes.
Even the Tower of Power was different, or the horns in Detroit and Philly were different. Then there's something about the Memphis thing, the out-of-tuneness, the breathing togetherness. It's really odd how it all came together for them.
So with the Memphis Horns, that was a three-piece, right?
Well, it started out as a group of local horn players. A guy named Charlie Chalmers, who was one of the singers at High on Al Green's things, a white guy, country There were two girls and a guy, all white, all country musicians, who sang all the backing vocals on Al Green. But for some reason, when people hear the records, they picture 3 big fat black women singing or something, you know, or they all say it's the what's their names, the big singing group at the Sweet Inspirations.
Okay.
It's got to be them. But no, it was country musicians, and they were white of all things. But most of Memphis was half white, half black, or some degree thereof. We didn't care. That's the whole thing about Memphis music. Nobody cared about your color or your religion or your whatever. It just was, can you do the music? Oh, yes, you can. Come on, you know. Or no, you can't. See you later. So that's that's Memphis in a nutshell to me, and Memphis music especially. They didn't care, but about other things than the love of music.
Absolutely.
So anyway, the horn players, a guy named, there were so many players early on. White guys, black guys, whatever. Willie Mitchell's brother James was one of the players. Ben Cawley of the Bar Caves was one of the trumpet players. The main lead trumpet guy was Wayne Jackson, of course. Andrew Love was the main sax guy. But early on, it was a larger group than just 2 guys or 3 guys. But when you think back to one of the first groups on Stax, and they were actually on satellite before they changed the name to Stax, first was the Marquis. It was Steve Cropper's group. He was the guitarist. Duck Dunn was the bassist. Don Nix was one of the sax players. Smoochie Smith was the keyboard player. Packy Axton, who was the son of Estelle Axton, of Stax founding, was one of the sax players. So they were just sort of a group of people all hanging out. Later, it was almost always Wayne and Andrew, and Wayne became the contractor. People would call Wayne to get the Memphis horn sound, whatever, and then Wayne would get whichever. This is how big a thing do you want? You know, 5 players. So he'd get, I want a Barry, I want 2 tenors, I want 2 trumpets, whatever people wanted. He'd contract for that. Then later, Wayne Jackson and Andrew Love, named themselves the Memphis Horns and copyrighted the name, trademarked the name, whatever, and became the Memphis Horns that we, over about the second half of all of it, knew and loved as the Memphis Horns. Mm-hmm. And they would bring the other guys in if needed. But for instance, Peter Asher, I worked on an album of Tony Joe White for Peter Asher at Warner Brothers when Peter was producing that. So he loved what we did. He loved the horns that came in. I get a call one night at home in my apartment from Peter. He said, hey, I want to do another session with the Memphis Horn guys on James Taylor. What do you think? And I said, yeah, that'll work. So I called Wayne. He had never heard of James Taylor. Didn't even know who he was, even though this was the second album or third, whatever, so he was #1 on the chart already. But Memphis, we don't care. We don't know who these guys are. So, but Wayne said, sure, session, I'll get whatever. So then we get to the session, and Wayne says, now who's this guy again? James Taylor. He's #1 on the Billboard chart right now. Oh, really? Wow, okay. And so this is how much Memphis don't care. This is how much. They're out there. Now, Wayne and Andrew and whoever the other guys were, these are all head charts, all head arrangements. They make it up. They don't get charts and play it, even though they can read. All horn players can read. But they don't do it that way. They do it the Otis way. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, we'll play that. You know, we made it up in our head. So Wayne and Andrew, the way it always worked, would start the song, and they'd just sit and listen, and one of them would say at a part of the song, ba-da-da-da, ba-da, right there. Okay, yeah, stop the tape. And they'd all learn it, ba-da-da-da-da-da. I'm just making that up, of course. Whatever the part was for that part of the song, quick, tape it, go out to the mic, play the thing, come back in, listen some more. Another part. Oh, here we could do a sustain, da-da-da-da. Yeah, okay, let's go out and record. Well, we're coming back and forth, doing all these parts. And everybody thinks there's charts and we're out there just playing, but it's not like that.
No.
And I don't know where else they did it like that. Probably nowhere else. No, Fame, Muscle Shoals.
Yeah, definitely not for horn sessions. You know what that reminds me of is I was talking to Bill about working with the Eagles, and he said, he had both guitar players sitting right next to him, one on the left, one on the right, one making Hotel California, and one person would be like, I'm going to do this, the other one would be like, I'm going to do that.
You can hear it.
They'd rewind the take, hit record, lay it down,
You can hear that too.
Yep.
It plays off of each other. So anyway, we're doing it like that. So they go out, and James, who is a musical genius, wrote most of the songs. He has an idea for a horn part. So big, tall, handsome James comes walking out into the studio. Says, hey guys, I have an idea. What if it did ba 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 whatever? And I'll never forget Wayne looking up like, what? You're telling me a horn part? What? So he just says, I'll tell you what, I have an idea too. We're hungry. Could you go across and get us some hamburgers? to James Taylor, who is the artist, who is paying him, whatever. But I don't care who you are. This is Memphis, buddy.
Did James go get the burgers?
Yes, he did. And I have a photograph that I've never released of James Taylor standing at the window of the Sweden Cream hamburger stand next door to the Big Star grocery.
Yep.
Sitting right there with the Big Star sign there, and James standing waiting for the hamburgers.
And that's a nice segue into your photography.
Excuse me.
Your photography career has been absolutely incredible, and not only did you capture a lot of recording studios and wonderful famous session photos, but you captured a lot of Memphis history.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always loved photography equally to music, and they're in a way the same thing. They're both an art form where you capture something onto a medium and then present it to other people. But they're so different that I can't, to me, I totally separate them. I look back now and say, you call yourself a photographer, yet you're in the studio with Otis Redding, you don't take a picture. Yet you're in the studio with Al Green, you don't take a picture. Jimmy Page standing there, we're mixing, you don't take a picture. Because that's not what you're there to do. Yeah. My mind is, I'm not like Bill Clinton. I can't compartmentalize and do all these other things at the same time. It's just separate things to me. It's a job. It's a love and a job all together that you're doing that time, that day. So I don't look at myself as a photographer who takes music photos. In fact, I don't like music. No offense to my friends who do that. I mean, they're great things people have done. And I've taken some photos. I've taken album cover pictures. A picture I took of Terry Reid at the Miami Pop Festival became famous and known as his album cover thing. And other great photographers were there, and they just didn't get that one. It's just whatever. But I think of myself, it sounds, I don't mean it in any egotistic way, but as an art photographer. I want to get something on a film that I see. It might be on this carpet here. It might be that little circle there that everybody else walks past and doesn't see, but I stopped and separated it from the world, and when you hang it on the wall, it actually it says something. Not that thing, but some individual thing that other people might walk right past.
I like that concept that I stopped and separated this from the world and hung it on the wall.
That's what it is to me.
Yeah.
And I was again, incredibly lucky. Luck. So many steps of the way in Memphis to become close friends with a guy who lived almost directly across the street from me for a number of years, named William Eggleston, who happened to become the most famous color photographer of history and is in all the museums, is taught at Harvard and other places, and is just, there's nobody like him. But before he's all that, we're just two guys who are out taking photos and talking about the mechanics of it, the cameras, lenses, different types of film, each having our dark rooms, the same way John Fry and I, or Steve Cropper and I, were talking about guitars or music or microphones, and just the way you learn it. There's a whole different art form that just happens to be centered in Memphis, but nobody knows it yet. Mm-hmm. And the main guy I just happened to be a friend of, and we're were all there together. He'd come and use my dark room or run out of Dektol, and I'd have some and I'd run it by him or something like that, you know. So, but to me, photography is right up there with music, if not more so. I can't choose which one I love the most or which one I'd rather do because it's just not possible. But I've got a picture of Steve Cropper when we were mixing Dock of the Bay as he's listening back to the playback of the mix. And he's sitting there, and the picture just says incredible sadness in it because there was just tears in the air that day. It was a cloud. It's the most horrible session I can ever think of finishing that song because everybody was Otis's friend. The horn players played, and then Steve mixed it with me, and we're all trying not to cry as we listen to that voice. You know, it's that kind of thing. But I do have some. I've taken Lenny Kravitz knew that I did photography and asked me to take. I've got hundreds of him because he asked me to. But in doing that, it's more of an assignment, and you're trying. Well, for instance, I'm sorry, I talk too much.
No, you're fine.
For instance, I had taken a photo in New York of a shop window on 14th. No, I don't remember. Maybe 14th Street. I think it was a shop window that sold wigs and belts. And I'd seen a little boy standing in front of it waiting for his mother to come out of the shop. And I just had a photo of this. And when I was in New York, I would go out every morning for 2 hours and take photos around New York, and then come in at noon or 1 or whatever to the session, click my mind, go, okay, now we're doing music, think of that, you know. But I would then, when I get the negatives back from the lab, or the prints, I would show Lenny, because he's a great photographer himself and has a wonderful book out, by the way. Brilliant. So anyway, and he's a Leica endorsee and sponsor. So I would show him that. He saw one of the little boys. Oh, I want a picture of me with his dreadlock hairdo at that time in front of that shop. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I've taken that photo. I don't ever take two.
No, you can't recreate it.
You know, I don't. A lot of people will go out and take 50 photos of the one thing. I take one. That's just all I do. If that didn't do it, tough. You know, I do it. I compose it. I get it with the way it ought to be. I take the photo. So I said to Lenny, he asked, okay, what do I do? Of course, let's go there. So we get up the next day, I take all my camera gear, everything. We go down to 14th Street, find the shop, get in front, and Lenny's stand there, and I said, okay, just stand right there. And I come up, click, said, okay, well, so what else do you want to take? He said, no, wait. That can't be it. I mean, we got to take a bunch. We got to find out. You know, and he'd pose, and he'd do this a different. Well, when we came back to it, the only one that either one of us would choose was the first photo, because that was the photo. This is hard to describe the way I think things in my head. But so anyway, I've taken some of Lenny. I've taken a few of other things, but I was very lucky, as you've alluded to. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, I talk too much.
No, you're fine.
I was very lucky to be not only musically in Memphis, but photographically, and in this case, historically in Memphis. Because in 67 and the very early part of 68, there was a lot going on in Memphis, civil rights-wise. Dr. King would come in, he was a Stax friend, aficionado. He would come by the Stax Studios. He knew me by sight, not as a friend. I don't want to impose myself into his world. He would come by for Al Bell, because they were close friends. They had worked together in the civil rights movement.
It's incredible to sit here with you and
thanks.
hear it from you, because I know that there's so much more details to these stories. And it goes back to my first question, you know, when did you realize that history was happening when you walked in the room? And I still don't think that you realized it to this day. Like, even when you talked about going and seeing Pink Floyd play that record for the first time.
That's just going to a show.
Yeah, that's just going to a show.
Lots of people did that.
You walk into the concert, history happens.
I received in the mail yesterday a book from Bill Janovitz, sorry, Bill, about Leon Russell. It's a book he's written. It's like almost 600 pages.
That's his world, Oklahoma City.
Oh, excellent.
Tulsa.
Oh, Tulsa.
Excellent. Yeah, I was born in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I read that.
Yep. I'm an Okie, but even though I grew up with so many things, and I keep getting on to other things. When I was in school in Texas growing up, and all the kids, it was a big deal to be Texan, a big deal. We'd get history books. It wasn't U.S. history or world history. It was always Texas history. You knew Texas history. You didn't care about it's a big deal. And the kids would all, I was born in Waco. I was born in Waco. Where were you born? I said, north of Dallas. And they, north of Dallas. And if I was lucky, they wouldn't ask what town because it was Oklahoma City.
Yes.
It's north of Dallas.
Dallas, yeah.
But I was ashamed to not say Texas.
Do you watch King of the Hill at all?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, there's that line in there. He's like, North Texas, I hate North Texas. Southern Oklahoma.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, we're in right now El Paso, Texas, which we call Far West Texas, all capitalized, because as much as we all love Texas here, and I mean deeply love it in our souls, Far West Texas is better, and it's state unto itself. It's different. So when I did my first live concert here in many years at a festival called Border Legends Festivals of 2013 maybe, I announced I was going to play I Fought the Law, and I announced that we're about to play the national anthem of Far West Texas, I Fought the Law, because Bobby Fuller's from here, that is our anthem, and
Yep.
Damn it. But it is a special thing. But I'll go backwards now to, we were talking about Memphis and photography.
Yes.
And how keep saying I was just so lucky to have landed in Memphis when I did, and all the things were happening. But the civil rights movement in those years, starting, well, all of the 60s, but 66, 67, really growing. I started as an, quote, art photographer, and I don't mean that with a capital A, just taking what I liked to see and capture. And I had a bit of a photojournalistic background as well with NME, and I've had pictures in other magazines and things. And so I started going around and just taking photos of black and white Memphis in a restaurant, what things look like, just street scenes, anything that I just thought, oh, there's something, I want that. And I want it in my mind to remember, and I'll have this to look back on, but not thinking it's historic. And now we have, with my photo manager, Chuck Toller, we have a full thing we're going to be doing in museums and galleries that's called Memphis 1967 to 1969, because it just shows you what things were like, how people were getting along, what they were doing, day-to-day, simple, everyday things that were happening and doing, but they're gone. They're all totally gone. Mm-hmm. And it is now historic, just by the virtue of the fact that history, time has passed, and anything past becomes part of history. So there it is. But the centerpiece of that, on April the 3rd, 1968, okay, I had been working in the studio with Al Bell. We're working on all kinds of recordings. I had just bought my very first brand new vehicle. I mean, before I'd had the band bus, an old Volkswagen bus, or a couple of things, but I went to a dealer and had a brand new car off the lot, a Ford Fairlane, and I was so proud and excited. And I'd mentioned it to Al Bell. Look, there's my brand new car out in the parking lot. Oh, yeah, nice. So he calls me up April the 3rd, 1968, and said, "Oh, Terry, that new car you've got, yeah? Would you mind using it for something this morning for me?" I said, "Well, yeah, what do you need?" He said, "Well, Dr. King is coming in at the airport with a bunch of the people. They're going to have another march. They had had the I Am a Man march a few days earlier, and it had ended, unfortunately, there were a few rowdy people at the end of the march that had caused some trouble, broken some windows. Police came out. So, of course, the white Memphis or white news media or whatever's going, oh, there go those black people rioting again, which is not what it was. I had been in that march myself with an I Am the Man sign, and it was lovely. You know, it was just because the sanitation workers of Memphis at that time were underpaid, they weren't trusted, they weren't taken care of. It was real no benefit. It was awful what the city was doing to the mostly black sanitation workers. So we all got our signs and marched. I am a man, meaning just because I'm a garbage worker, a garbage man, or just because I'm black or just whatever, I am a man. I deserve more, which is all the whole civil rights thing encapsulated in one place at one time, led by Dr. King. But it had ended with this trouble, so Dr. King says, we're having another march. We're doing it again. I want nonviolence. I want peace and love. I don't want you troublemakers. That's not us. That's not what we're doing. That's not what we're trying to have happen. So he came here for that next march. Came in, flying in the morning of April 3rd, 68. I go to the airport, parked my car right in front because there was no security then. You could park anywhere you could park. And walk right down the hallways toward the gates and whatever. And as I left the door of my apartment that morning, I was just about to go out, I looked over. I usually would take my Leicas, but I didn't have one loaded. But there was a Nikon. I had a rangefinder right there, SLR, that was fully loaded and ready. I thought, oh, I'll just take that. Who knows what I'll see. Well, I get in the thing. Here comes Dr. King down the hallway with Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, a whole retinue of his people, Ernest C. Withers, a couple of the local Memphis ministers, black ministers, coming down as a whole group of people. And I'm walking toward them. I see behind me the whole news media is charging down the hall with their cameras and lights and everything. Oh, gosh, here they come. He'll love that. So I just walk up and get right next to Dr. King, who knew me by sight from Stax because of Al Bell. And I was there with several other Stax people driving our cars to take his luggage and people to the Lorraine Motel from the airport. So now, Dr. King did not ride in my car. I'm not that important, but a few luggage things did, and maybe one or two guys. I walk up and I just got my camera, so I'm as close with my camera as my hand is to my face now to Dr. King's face. And I get some photos that he fills the full frame of 50 millimeter lens, full on. You can see the stubble, where he shaved, where he didn't, just everything. I take 13 photographs of Dr. King, then go and get in the car and take whoever it was that got in my car, drove down to the Lorraine Motel, left there and went straight to Ardent Studio came back to the airport, picked up a band from Missouri, and took them to Ardent, and we started our session. We're just working along. I meant to go back down to the Lorraine at some point to see if Al was there and what's going on. Is there going to be another march? Whatever. That night, after the session, I had heard that there was, but I was so busy in the studio I never went. And I heard there was going to be a meeting, a rally in a place called Mason Temple, a church in Memphis, near downtown Memphis. And Dr. King might speak. And I thought, well, I'll go to that. Unfortunately for me, I did not take a camera to that. But went down there, and Dr. King wasn't there yet. But it's full of people. Ralph Abernathy's up there speaking. This place, this church, has skylights around a square. There's a roof, then skylights, and then a center roof. So there's skylights in a square around the church. Outside is a massive storm, thunder, lightning flashing like crazy through the skylights, illuminating the church like a strobe light at times. Just whoosh, and They wanted Dr. King. The crowd wanted Dr. King. So they send someone back to the Lorraine. You've got to come. They want you. They want you at this rally. So King, of course, Dr. King, I wasn't right there, said, okay, I'll come. On the way there, in the car, he wrote a quick few notes. And the speech he gave that night was, I've been to the mountaintop. I may not get there with you. It was half extemporaneous and half things he had just thought in his mind. Incredible speech. I was standing right beneath him. He was up on a pulpit, a raised thing, and I was right beneath him, just looking up with this lightning flashing through, illuminating it off and on his face, with his words coming out of the PA, and I was, oh my God, this is amazing. Just talk about history. I didn't have a camera, of course. But anyway, the next day I have to go back to the studio for the session. We get a phone call, middle of the day. Dr. King has been shot. He's assassinated. Al was in a session at Stax for some girl's thing he was doing, girl singer, and he got the call. He's the one who called over, and no one could believe it. So I ended up with, I don't know if it was the very last still photos taken of Dr. King. Certainly was among the last, but I've not seen others that I know that were later. But anyway, among the last, I've taken 4 of those that are the best, because some of them are almost the same. I've got those 4, and I didn't even look at them for, at 68, 40, for at least 35, 40 years. Didn't even see them. Couldn't look at them somehow. Finally got them out. Once I was cajoled by a good friend who ran the photography and darkroom department at MIT. Just said to me, you've got to get these photos out. I want exhibits. You've got to do this. What if you die and your things get thrown away? Do something. And I'd always meant to, but there's so much music going on, I couldn't. But finally I just said, okay, stopping any recording now, I can. I'll go and get these boxes of negatives and things. I'll scan things. I'll do whatever. So ended up, my favorite photos are the color photos of just a thing I like, almost paintings, but they're photographs and they're color, but they're odd things, or whatever. There's things I like, and that's what I like the best to show. But the black and white things, with especially Memphis in that period, and especially with 4 big real close-ups of Dr. King just hours before he's killed as the centerpiece, have now become a special exhibit of historic Memphis exhibit.
As they should be.
I guess as they should be, but we're also planning other exhibits. We had to stop. I had several really good ones going, and then COVID hit, and you couldn't do anything, and nobody could go out to a museum, and I had to stay at home for 2.5 years and whatever, which is great too. You could do a lot of things there and watch some good TV, see more Perry Mason. But anyway, now we're getting back to it finally, and we're going to do some other exhibits of all the things.
So, when it comes to Memphis history, there's another person that we haven't touched on, and, he's always had such an interesting history to me, and I found out about him through a television theme song show, which was That 70s Show.
Oh, Alex Chilton.
Yes, and Big Star. I heard that song, and I was like, this song's cool. Who sang this song? And then I went and found the original Big Star version, which is different. Also incredible. But then I heard the craziest story about, him hating his own record and wanting to destroy it. And
not exactly. The person who wanted to destroy Big Star's first album, mm-hmm. which for those who don't know is called Number One Record, was Chris Bell.
Okay.
The guitarist and co-founder of that. Chris became my best friend for 10 years in Memphis. I brought him for the first time into a real profession. He had recorded a little bit over at that Sonic studio I'd mentioned as demo things with his first band, the Jinx. But to come into to Ardent as a real studio on real sessions that people were paying for, all that. I brought him in to do some guitar work first on an album of mine I was doing, on a couple of other things. And Chris just fell in love with recording, with writing songs. He was a huge Beatlemaniac as well. And he started hanging out at Ardent, and we formed a band, loosely formed a band that would go out and play parties and things called either Ice Water or Christmas Future or Rock City, different names, but with different people, kind of a revolving group of local young guys playing Beatle-type, English-type rock music. And so we got to know a lot of other people in that, playing that genre of music around Memphis, and great musicians, great people, and started to say, well, let's record an album. And we recorded with some of Chris's songs and another guy named Tom Eubank, some of his songs. I played piano in that and sang the harmonies. Tom played bass, Chris played guitar, Jody Stevens played the drums.
Okay.
So there's two of Big Star already doing this Forerunner album.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of kept growing. Then Alex Chilton, who had been in the Box Tops, lead singer, had world number one hit, The Letter, and several other hits, Soul Deep, Cry Like a Baby, Neon Rainbow, some great songs, produced by Dan Penn at American under the aegis of Chips Moman over there, all-white Memphis soul rock band. Bill Cunningham, lots of good young guys in there. But and Gary Talley, of course. I don't mean to leave people out, but I can't talk forever, I guess.
No, I appreciate it.
But when Alex quit the Box Tops, it kind of imploded. It's back now, and it came back with Alex later, until he was sadly died in 2010. But Alex was looking for something to do, and I had been recording the vocals and doing overdubs of strings and things, engineering for Dan Penn, who would bring the Box Top stuff over to Ardent for me to mix again, or to do overdubs and things. So if we did strings, we'd bring in the orchestra, Memphis Orchestra, and bring in Memphis Symphony, and bring them in and do it there. Or I even played harpsichord on Cry Like a Baby, believe it or not. But Alex was there a lot, and we'd do all his vocals. He and I were younger, maybe a couple of years younger than Dan Penn and Spooner, his partner, but we thought they were old guys, and we knew better. We were the young, hip guys. So we'd look at each other and laugh and make fun of them a little bit, although now I look back, and what incredible talents Dan Penn and Spooner Oldham were and are.
And Spooner Oldham, you're talking about the keyboard.
Keyboard player, yeah.
For Maritha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was Dan's writing partner at the time and producing partner, whatever. So they would be there and just showing their incredible talents. The songs they wrote, Dan's a vocalist like nobody else. I mean, after Otis Redding, for that style vocal, you've got Eddie Hinton and Dan Penn is about what it is for that totally gruff soul thing, especially if you're talking white guys. But I got very close with Alex on the Box Top sessions. So when he left, he said, I want to write my own songs. I want to record my own record. Would you produce it for me? So I said, well, sure. So we went in and started working on his songs and a couple of covers, having fun. Again, we did a crazy cover of Jumpin' Jack Flash and put in Sugar Sugar by the Archies in it. Just laughing, joking, having a big time, and recorded this album that didn't come out till the 90s. So it's almost 25 years later or so till it comes out.
This is the Big Star record?
No. This is Alex Chilton's solo album.
Okay.
But Chris started hanging out, Chris Bell. Alex was in there. So we just sort of shelved the stuff I did with Alex, and we all started on what became Big Star's #1 record. And I sang Alex and I sang all the backing vocals, the harmonies, and I played all the keyboards on it. But I didn't want to be in the band because we were trying to copy the Beatles. So we only wanted 4 guys in the band, and we wanted no credits, producer or song, whatever. Just we wanted everything the Beatles did, we tried to copy it. We even made the album cover glossy like the English covers were. So we tried so hard to be the Memphis Beatles. And that turned into Big Star, and then later Chris quit the band. He wanted to burn the tapes. He thought, the story was, it had come through the group of friends that Chris wanted to destroy the multi-tracks and the mixes, the stereo mixes, because it just wasn't as good as he could do it. I got wind of this. He did get to the studio and destroyed the multi-tracks. They're the 8-tracks, they're non-existent.
Oh, shit.
Yep, which is a good thing, though. It turned out to be, thank you, Chris, although he's been in heaven since 78. But it's a good thing that the multi-tracks were destroyed. I'll get to that in a minute. But the mixes, I had gotten there before him, and I found the mixes and swapped them in a box that said something else. So when he destroyed the stereo mix box, it was something else. It was some other stuff I'd put in there. But I did save the mixes, so we did have an album. Turned out we would have had it anyway because there were safeties that had been sent through Stax to England. But anyway, those were saved. But Alex didn't want to destroy it. It was Chris that did.
Okay.
But Alex Chilton was the biggest rebel in all of pop music. He really kind of became the inventor of punk music.
Okay.
Or maybe it was he and I together by doing crazy things in the studio. I don't know. But he didn't really like Big Star later. He didn't like the Box Tops later. He would just do covers of things or write other songs he wanted to do and be the ultimate rebel, which some people really have taken to and love. Mm-hmm. That he is this crazy guy who did his own thing to the detriment of his own career, in a way. But we were close friends for many years. We were going to get together and do another Big Star album, actually. But in typical Alex fashion, he wanted to write a song in the morning, record it in the afternoon, and in 10 days we'll have an album. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, well, didn't we do that before? I said, no, we worked on the #1 album for a year. It took a lot of late night work there for that. So anyway, he was he's a real James Dean rebel type guy in a way.
Did I hear some crazy story about you and him going out to L.A. and hanging out with the Beach Boys and Charles Manson?
Sadly, that is true. Alex was a great friend. And this is another of those moments I'll never forget. I can picture every inch of the situation. I'll come back to that. But Alex had toured with the Beach Boys, with the Box Tops and the Beach Boys on tours. And they became very close friends, especially Carl Wilson and Dennis secondarily. But and Brian, yeah, too. But you can't quite get as close to Brian as to Carl in any ways. But when the Big Star #1 record album was finished, we had already moved over to the new Ardent Studio on Madison Avenue, and Carl was coming through with the Beach Boys to play a concert in Memphis. So Alex had hooked up with him, and he wanted to play Carl his new album at the time, Big Star's #1 record. So Chris Bell got wind of this, and he wanted to come, and Alex had told him don't come, but he came anyway. So we go into Ardent Studio A, and there's Carl sitting up against the back wall waiting to hear, and Alex and Chris are sitting there. It's just me and the three of them, and I hit play, and we're starting, and the first song is, I think, Feel, and it starts off the thing, and the vocal starts, and Carl says, stop the tape, wait a minute. I want Brian to hear this. Do you have a speakerphone? I said, yeah, there's a speakerphone right here. So Carl dials Brian, gets him on the phone, says, Brian, this is Alex's new group called Big Star. It's his album. It sounds great already. I've only heard part of one song. I want you to hear it. So I'm sitting there playing for Carl Wilson and Brian over the phone with Chris and Alex sitting there, the Big Star album, and I'm just going, this is special. I like this minute. That's just one of those things of wow, you know.
I like this minute.
Yeah, then we're trying to lease it to some record company to get it put out, and everybody was turning it down. Nobody wanted it. All through New York, we'd been to everywhere, been to Hollywood, nobody wanted it. And Alex said, well, I bet Brother Records will take it. That's the Beach Boys label through Capitol. If we go out and we'll play it, Carl likes it already, Brian likes it already, maybe we can get them to like it. So they wouldn't take the album, they just didn't feel like they could do it. But I remember, we're going to California, I'm going to meet these people, my tennis shoes are old and have a hole in them, and I talked John Fry into giving me an advance against salary to go buy a new pair of tennis shoes, which I did. So we go out to California in my new shoes, and we go to Dennis's house. And there's a guy there who wants to play Dennis his demos. And Dennis had invited him into his house, and all these weird people sitting around. And it turns out it's Charles Manson. And he's got his acoustic guitar, and he's singing and playing. And Alex and I are listening and looking at each other like, something not right about this.
These songs suck.
And there were drugs going around. And I don't do drugs. I've never really done any serious drugs. I hate it. Mm-hmm. I don't even drink. But I just was uncomfortable. This guy had a bad vibe. I didn't like it. And even to Alex, he gave a bad vibe. So Alex, I don't remember if he left with me or if he stayed a while, but I got out of there. Just didn't want to do it. And find out later, Charles Manson was looking for a producer named Terry Melcher.
Yes.
That was going to produce his album, damn it, or else. And later, when he went to the house and the killings happened, it was where Terry Melcher used to live. Mm-hmm. And he had moved out of there because Manson knew where he lived.
That's
so, and my wife now goes, "Oh no, you would have been the Terry that was killed." I said, no, it wasn't like that. Don't put me farther into the story.
You're both Terry M's. It's pretty close. It's not like he's Terry Powell or something.
Yeah, but he knew who he wanted, and he had a famous mother too. So
yes.
There you go.
But you just brought up something that I thought was very, very interesting. Not utilizing drugs and alcohol in the studio, and a lot of people have opinions on that whole stuff. But you've been around for so many decades and worked with so many different artists, clearly you've run into that sort of situation. And you don't have to name names or anything like that, but has there ever been a record that you just walked away from, that you couldn't continue on with the shenanigans and antics that the artist was up to?
Yes. There are two artists, not from seeing drugs in the studio or knowing that they did drugs or anything like that. But there are two artists that I turned down working with, both of which I could kick myself for turning down now, because they're great, great artists, and if I had done those albums, I could have been a contender. But anyway, one was Jerry Lee Lewis. Mm-hmm. And I'd been asked not to produce Jerry Lee, but to engineer a Jerry Lee Lewis album, and in Memphis, and I was a huge fan. I love Jerry Lee Lewis, but there had just been an incident in a previous session where there was a gun in the studio that had been fired by Jerry Lee, and he had hit his bass player and manager, and I believe, if I have the memory right, I think he was also the father of his then very young wife or something. There was a big connection there, and he had shot this guy in the studio, and I thought, boy, I just don't want to get shot in the studio. And I turned it down. But now Jerry Lee Lewis, who was the penultimate, if not ultimate, complete musician artist of the 20th century, who is more talented than he was? I don't know. He played the bass, he played the rhythm, he played the lead, he sang it, he wrote the songs. I mean, he is unbelievable. So that's one I really regret. Another was Ozzy Osbourne, years later. There was a talk of me producing an Ozzy Osbourne album. I went to their house in London, met Sharon and Ozzy, both really lovely people. And their little kids were out with the nanny on the swings. Out, you could see them out of the window, family life and all that. I thought, this is great. Plus, I love this guy's voice. I love his songs. This could be really good. They came to Abbey Road Studio where I was working. We sat in the canteen down there and talked over some things. they wanted to use a real drummer. At the time, I, like an idiot, wanted to use a drum machine, which I had big success with ZZ Top and a couple of things.
Yes.
But it would have been the wrong choice, so they were right on that. But anyway, then I went to HMV Record Shop, downtown London, and started looking at the albums. And they all had these satanic images and crazy things. And just something struck me. I said, I don't want to be part of that. And I turned that down, which they may have turned me down too. I don't know. But I'd look back now, what an idiot.
Well,
it's an act. It's part of the game. And the demos we had were incredible. It would have been a great album. It would have been so good, and I would have given in and used the real drummer anyway.
So you just said something that I find so interesting, which is, you know, if I would have done these things, I may have been a contender.
Well, that's a semi-joke.
No, I know.
Because I know I'm known for doing some okay things, but I was taking the line from the movie, the movie shot in Hoboken.
Yep.
On the the waterfront, on the waterfront.
Yeah, you know, but it's just so interesting, though. There are these decisions in your life that you still believe could have pushed your career further forward.
Well, had I gotten to do that Beatles song, what a great thing to have on your resume.
Especially if that's the only song they ended up recording in America.
Yep, that would have been great. If I'd not been an idiot with Ozzy Osbourne or Jerry Lee Lewis, just because, not for any self-promotional reasons, but because I love those things. All those three artists, I love them.
Yes.
Oh, God, I mean, phew.
Well, you know, let's get into something here, which we haven't spoke about, and, you know, we probably have to, you know, it seems like you and I could talk all day. But
whatever you want, I'm fine.
But, you know, as someone who doesn't care so much about the numbers on the sides of gear, you went out and made some pretty incredible equipment yourself, which for me is holy grail stuff, everybody. I have lots of gear. I own none of the Lucas stuff, but I'm searching for it every day.
Well, the way that started, and I personally have not been in the shop soldering things. I tried, they won't let me because I'm not a very good solderer. But I had two UA 176 compressors, limiters. They called it limiting amplifier. Putnam called them that, which were my all-time favorite compressors. And one of them went down. In the mixes, I would always record vocals through it, bass through it, all sorts of things. And then in the mix, I'd use it on two places, my two favorite places. I had one that went down, stopped working. I couldn't get anybody to repair it. And I'm just going, what am I going to do with one UA 176 when I need two or more? So I got with a great, great tech named Frank Lacey, one of my all-time great favorite people, and said, he was a tech at a studio downtown Memphis at that time, and I said, Frank, can't we make these? And he said, we can't make them. I said, I can take it apart, I can find the topology of it, I can figure out why it does what it does. I can't even get the parts to fix yours right now, but I can make and it won't be a clone, but it's going to be something in that ballpark that does what that does. It'll be tube, it'll be transformer, it will take care of compression in a certain way, and I don't know enough to, or won't want to go deep enough to say exactly what. So I said, okay, try it. So he went and made one, came back to me, and I said, well, I like it, but if I could do certain things with it a little more like the other, or here, he would take it back and do some tweaks, bring it back 3 or 4 times, and then I said, I love it, it's perfect. Now how many can we make? He said, well, I can make as many as you can pay for, I guess. So I got maybe 3 or 4 of them. I call it the Lucas Limiting Amplifier. And it started as a tribute to the UA 176, not the 175, but the 176. Not the 1176 by any means. So I had them, I started using them. This was in my Studio 6 in Memphis, my own private big studio. Long story about what it was. It had been several other names as studios, but I had bought it, redid it as mine. Again, it was private, much like Berry Gordy. I didn't want to rent it out, but a couple of people John Hampton, who was a close friend and a very good engineer, wanted to rent it to use on a band called Little Texas,
Okay.
I think, country group. And I said, okay. Well, John used it. He said, what's this compressor? This is great. So he wanted it. Then other people would come into my studio, artists, producers come in. I would take a Pete Anderson thing to mix a group he was doing. Oh, I love that compressor. And people started hearing about it somehow. Then somebody wanted one of their own. So, okay, I got Frank to make one for them. Called it, Lucas is my youngest son's name,
Okay.
who was born and was a very young baby right at the time. So I just thought I'll use his name. It's not George Lucas, it's my son Lucas. So we started making the compressors. Then he made me, we made a thing called the Deceiver, which is a box that separates guitar signals so that they're properly isolated, so all the impedances are right if you go into 2 or 3 amps or tuners and amps and DI boxes and whatever. It deceives the guitar into thinking it's going into 1 amp. It deceives the amp into thinking it's all by itself coming from that guitar. People started hearing about it, sold them probably 100 of them all over the world. Just went on for years, and the more people then when I got to Compass Point, I had all my Lucas gear there. Lenny bought a bunch of it. He used it in his live stage racks, things he loved it so much. It just has its own special sounds.
That's amazing.
That I've not found anywhere else. And we've sold a lot of the compressors. Ended up with equalizers. We've sold a lot of tube equalizers, which don't sound like any other equalizer. The Pultec, for instance, which everybody loves or thinks they love, is the tubes don't do the work. It's a passive resistor network making the equalization. Mm-hmm. The tube is bringing up the 10 or 12 dB that's lost as it goes through other things. So I wanted an equalizer that all of it is tube. The tube actually does the change in EQ. It was quite a bitch to do something like that. But Frank figured it out, took some great ideas based really on the very early Western Electric ideas of equalization that Leo Fender had incorporated into the early Bassman and things like that, mm-hmm. which became what Jim Marshall used in the early Marshalls. It's a whole concept of equalization. And we made, I'm sorry, I'll talk forever on these.
No, you're
but
fine.
It became all the equalization done inside the tubes. And it had a sound, when you went to 10K and cranked it up, never harsh, always sweet. It just didn't sound like any other equalizer I had ever heard. All of the bands on it just didn't sound like other things. I use them on every session I do. I have since we had them. I even came up with something I called the EQ sandwich, which starts with a Lucas limiter on a certain setting, let's say 4-to-1 or 12-to-1 to begin with, then goes straight to a Lucas equalizer, which did all the proper EQ as needed on that thing, which went out to another Lucas compressor, which had a different setting because it did a different type of compression. I don't want to get too technical on what it did, but I use that EQ sandwich on hundreds of sessions. It just gives a sound I can't get anywhere else.
That is amazing.
And I've had people that are engineers, producers everybody knows the name of them. They've come into Compass Point and heard them and just, I have to have one.
So is this EQ sandwich, is that a limiter and then an equalizer and then a compressor, or is it 2 of the limiters but the second one?
It's using one more as a limiter and one more as a compressor.
But they're the same box?
It's the same box.
Okay, so I just need 2 Lucas limiters and then the Lucas EQ.
Yeah.
Okay. That, is easy to do.
And I brought some with me.
Oh, good God.
But we turned into doing that for many, many years of making those things. And we don't really make much anymore because Frank got a little tired of it. I got a little tired of it. I have what I need, which was the goal originally. It wasn't for anybody else. It was all for me. I'm greedy. I don't want anybody else to have it, but whatever. I've got maybe 14 of the compressors.
What?
12, 14, something.
How many 176s do you have?
Oh, just the one left.
Did the other one never get fixed?
No, it could never get fixed.
Really?
Yeah, just the one now. But
Damn.
Anyway, I don't use it anymore. I wouldn't use after the Lucas. Honestly, I don't need it.
Yep.
It's better. I'm sorry to say. Sorry, Bill. He's not alive. But
No,
anyway.
no. Hey, be proud of the stuff you make, and you have so much to be proud for, man.
Oh no, thanks. But it's really, sorry, it's really a crazy idea I've had in my head from the beginning, is that I wanted, at some point, every single part along the way of making music to be something of my own. I wanted the song I wrote, I was producing in my studio using all my own gear only, and release it on my label. And I know that's crazy because you can't really do that, even though I have all those things, a label to a certain, everyone can have a label. But
Well, the last time you put out a record was what, 2020?
I think around 2019-ish.
So you're still recording music, and you're
Oh yeah, I've got at least 3 complete albums ready to be released
Yes.
now. And we're going to start releasing one of the albums. But now, you know, the music business is so different now. You almost think, why bother? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to, because this is one of the 2 businesses I love so much and have done so much for me over life. But it's just pitiful what it's become now. It's me as an artist, I'm no big name. It's not like David Bowie's releasing a new thing or something. There are a few people who have known the things I've released under my name over the years. Some of it's done a little, and some of it's done not much, whatever. But today, to put out an album under my name means almost nothing to the world of music. Partly because I'm older, partly because I'm not a band, I guess, and I'm maybe not as good as I wish I were. But really, the biggest reason is the music industry has changed so much. It's left what I like the most. There's still some good things in it and of it out there doing it, but so much, and you can't even sell things anymore. It's all streamed. Even the biggest, there was a week a year ago where I think it was Rihanna that had the #1 song on Billboard, and it sold 1,400 physical copies that week.
Yep.
And it was #1.
I remember that, yeah.
Now, I've sold more than 1,400 of my stuff. Is it going to #1?
No.
No. But it's just crazy what it is. It's just become this, it's a different world, and I don't know if it can ever go back. Chris Blackwell and I talked about that quite a bit a few years ago, which is prior to it getting as bad as it is now. And he was saying we should sell records over our phones for a quarter. That's our only chance. And now it's worse than that. You know?
Yeah.
They're free over your phone.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I do have at least 3 albums that I'll be putting out over the next 3 years. But we're now going to put out a single at a time. And I don't like to do this. I like to release an album, a statement that has components to it that speak to each other and mean something together, hopefully. But we can't do that now because it means not much. The only way to get anywhere in it is to release about every 4 to 6 weeks a new single that you can go crazy promoting over social media and get numbers over Spotify or whatever thiefdom place that steals our music and doesn't pay much for it. Spotify being the biggest of the thieves. Anyway, you've got to get numbers on that, and then you keep building them, and then you finally put an album out after you've had 4 or 5 of these singles that aren't really singles, just individual releases, and you can actually get numbers that way that mean a little bit, but not like it used to be. You know, when you'd release a new Zeppelin album, bang,
Yep.
#1 in the world, thank you, in a week, you know, so. But anyway, yeah, I still do it. I love music. I love to write, compose. My biggest love musically is to write. I hate the term, but I don't know how to describe it otherwise. Classical music, music that has come to be. And mine's not classical because it's not a classic, if you know what I mean. It's not 300 years old, but it's in orchestral genre of things. That's what I like to write for a full orchestra, and I've got a full album of 3 symphonies I want to do at some point with a real orchestra. But that's a big thing, expensive to do.
Do you have an orchestra that you've worked with before out here? Or?
Not here, but I'm thinking of talking to one.
Okay.
There is an El Paso Symphony. There is a Juarez Symphony across the river in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And I went to a concert. They got together, the two symphonies, did a concert about 3 years ago, just before COVID. I forget the piece they did. Bum, 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 bum. Dun, 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 dun. Just won't fly into my head at this point. But they did it with a full chorus, two choruses put together, and two symphony orchestras put together. And it was overpowering, you know.
I could only imagine.
So I'd love to get some of those people and get them on board and do something. But will that ever happen? I don't know. You get dreams, you want to do things in music. I have lots more I want to do. But I like that because it keeps you going.
Well, if there's anything that us over at Make Believe can help you do to accomplish these things, the studio is yours. You're more than welcome to it.
Oh, great.
And
thanks.
we have a wonderful symphony out in Omaha, and our buddy Ian Elio is very, very close to them. And I actually just gave him the studio for the past 2 weeks while we're on this trip. So he owes me a favor, Ian.
Hey, that's an idea. Because I'm two of the three symphonies, they're only 15 minutes.
Yep.
But I don't know what else to call them other than a symphony, symphonette, whatever.
Yeah.
But there are some that are that length. Two of the three are fully scored. I mean, ready to go. The scores are there. One still needs the final scoring done. It's still in Sibelius. But that would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's one of those things to just get cut the demo with them, cut it somewhere else. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I would love for someone like that to hear it.
Yeah.
Two people in symphonic work have heard things and they really like them. But
I'd be happy to send it to them. I'd be happy to put you in touch with the people who are playing, and anything we can do to help you, we will.